Chapter 30. The Invisible Man. Becoming invisible was a skill James had acquired at an early age. Between his father's work and the countless hours he spent in his laboratory and his mother's duties with the Wisengamot, he had learnt to blend into his surroundings, to move without making a sound or disturbing his parents or their guests. It wasn't that he didn't want to be seen. When he was younger, he loved to stand out. But he knew that sometimes, to get what he wanted, it was best that no one suspected he had been involved at all. James's knack for concealment had made him and his friends the most notorious pranksters in Hogwarts history, and had also turned him into an insufferable show-off in need of being taken down a peg. On the other hand, those skills had proved to be very useful as he grew older and joined the Order. He entered the Hogwarts grounds via the passage beneath the Whomping Willow. The autumn evening was bitterly cold, and the lit windows of the castle looked warm and inviting. Pulling his coat tighter around himself, James made his way towards the school as darkness fell, the rustle of fabric swallowed by the whistle of the wind. Hagrid's hut was dark and cold, and no one was around to notice a wizard slipping across the grounds under cover of dusk, heading for the damp, chilly greenhouses, where there was a secret entrance into the castle. The Aurors from the ministry, assigned to guard the school in these tense days, had not thought to post a watch on the grounds bordering the forest, under the mistaken assumption that no one could sneak in from a direction where there was nothing but lake water and endless woodland. James thought that assumption idiotic. He was proof of it, but tonight it worked in his favor. He emerged from behind a tapestry near the kitchens. This was exactly the time when the students and teachers would be getting ready for the traditional Halloween feast, which meant the castle would be quiet and empty. The marauder's map and his invisibility cloak were with Harry, but after years of nocturnal prowling in the castle, James no longer truly needed them. He knew every secret passage and hiding place as well as the back of his hand, and had memorized the ghost's nighttime patrol routes. Armed with this knowledge, he climbed confidently to the 5th floor. He didn't know what he expected to find at the site of the attack that occurred 2 nights before. He only knew that he couldn't just sit idly by at the thought that Voldemort might be weaving his web inside Hogwarts, and that no one intended to do anything about it. Dumbledore kept assuring everyone he had the situation under control, even though events at Hogwarts seemed to take him by surprise again and again. Lily was just as frustrated by the situation as he was, if not more. She attempted to investigate the site of the attack, but her attempt was foiled when Umbridge suddenly appeared and threatened to make public the fact that Harry and Emily were somehow involved in the event. Not wanting to risk their children getting dragged deeper into it, she left without protest. James hated seeing Lily like that. The fact that Harry and Emily had somehow gotten caught in the midst of it all made it even worse for her. She kept asking herself what the point was of her being at Hogwarts if she couldn't do anything to protect their children, and was even considering quitting her job over it. James convinced her not to do anything rash and decided to go do some investigating on his own. Though he could have asked his friends for help with this mission, James chose to go alone. He knew Remus couldn't risk being caught inside Hogwarts after his career that had ended in the revelation that he was a werewolf, especially with Umbridge lurking around. Sirius was still a wanted man and couldn't exactly go on midnight escapades in the heart of the school. But beyond that, James had to admit, deep down, that he bore Sirius a touch of resentment for the fact that Harry had turned to him in his hour of need, so he hadn't shared his plan with him. While sneaking through the 3rd floor, James heard murmured voices. He slipped behind a suit of armor and waited, but the couple in the corridor didn't seem inclined to go anywhere. Peering out from his hiding place, James instantly recognized Ginny's red hair in the light of a distant torch. She was standing very close to a boy who was definitely not Harry. "Michael, we need to get to the feast," Ginny told her boyfriend, who didn't seem remotely interested in the feast. "A few more minutes," he said. "No one will notice." "McGonagall will," Ginny replied, dodging his attempt to kiss her. She's not as easygoing as Flitwick, you know. Michael ignored this and carried on. James had heard enough. He aimed his wand at him from his hiding place and murmured the words of a jinx he remembered all too well, though he hadn't used it since his school days. A sharp fart echoed in the corridor. Michael froze in his attempts to kiss Ginny, who stared at him. James cast the jinx again and watched with satisfaction as the boy's face turned crimson in the gloom. I mean, it's not. At James's command came a third fart, long and especially wet. Ginny's boyfriend fled in mortified disgrace, leaving her stunned, amused, and disgusted in equal measure. Once he had gone, she made her way towards the great hall, quietly chuckling to herself. Pleased with his mischief, James waited until both were out of sight before strolling onwards. The corridor on the fifth floor where the attack had taken place looked completely innocent, without a trace of dark magic. James had expected to feel something, even just a faint bitter tang in the air or a barely perceptible cold draft from nowhere. But there was nothing. The corridor was entirely devoid of objects, with no portraits to recount what had happened, empty save for a large mirror in a silver frame. James looked into the mirror, which reflected his image with perfect clarity. He had once heard that particularly powerful magic cast before a mirror could burn itself into the glass, leaving traces of its nature and of the witch or wizard who had performed it. He tried a simple revealing charm, but nothing happened. He tried a more complex spell, but that, too, had no effect. Realizing with frustration that he would either have to research the matter or enlist Lily's talents, James examined the polished surface one last time before moving on, when a flash of red caught his eye. He froze, staring again into the mirror, but saw only his own stern reflection. For a moment, though, he thought his eyes in the reflection had turned from brown to blood red. Cedric. With a feeling of confusion like waking from sleep, James stretched and looked around, realizing that the torchlight in the corridor had dimmed to weak flickers. At the far end, he could just make out, with difficulty, the shadow of a person in the darkness. He slipped away at once, pressing himself against the wall behind a nearby suit of armor, his heart pounding hard as he cursed himself for his lack of concentration. "Cedric, is that you?" The voice came again, faint and broken. There was the sound of bare feet slapping against the stone floor. James peered cautiously between the metal plates of the armor, and for a moment thought he was looking at a ghost. She was as thin as a skeleton and entirely white, her skin almost the same color as the long nightdress she wore, while her short hair was black as coal. But she wasn't a ghost. She was a living, breathing girl. From the nightdress, which was of the sort worn by patients in Madame Pomfrey's hospital wing, James understood that she was the girl who had been attacked a few days earlier, the one Emily had found. "Please," the girl said hollowly into the darkness. James stood utterly still, though a shiver passed through him. He knew she was speaking to him, even if she thought he was someone else. "Why can't you leave me alone? I know you won't come back. You'll never come back. So why?" Her sobs drowned the end of the sentence. James felt his insides twist at the sound, raw and heartbreaking. Something in him wanted to step out and comfort her, to promise her that life went on, but the sensible part of him knew he mustn't reveal himself. At last, the girl turned back the way she had come, walking away in tears. With a heavy heart, James set off silently in the opposite direction, fighting the urge to go and find Lily, to hold her and never let go. Comforting himself with the thought that his little foray hadn't been a complete waste of time, if only because he had managed to separate Ginny from her boyfriend. He turned back towards the secret passage to the greenhouses, thinking of what he had seen in the mirror. One of the most important things his mother had taught him about the wizarding world was that if you weren't sure whether you had imagined something you'd seen, you probably hadn't imagined it at all. But what was it that he had seen? Was it an indication that Voldemort, whose eyes were red as blood, had indeed visited Hogwarts by means of dark magic and left his mark in the mirror? Or was it something else, something more sinister? A flicker of torchlight, on a far wall signaled to James that someone was approaching. This time, knowing he had a few moments to find cover, he slipped silently behind the balustrade wall overlooking the passage where the other person was due to appear, across an opening above a small inner courtyard on the second floor. A few seconds later, two auras appeared, walking in silence with their wands in hand. James was pleased to see that one of them was Tonks. A third aura suddenly appeared in front of them, surprising them and James alike. James hadn't noticed him approaching from the other direction, even though he thought he'd been watching. He was senior to the other two, a few years younger than James. He might have been handsome if his eyes hadn't been sunken and dark, shrouded in shadow. "All quiet, sir," Tonks's partner reported eagerly. "Return to the castle entrance," the senior aura ordered. "We need to check the fourth floor and the hospital wing," Tonks argued. "Return," the superior replied impatiently. "That's an order." "At once, or a hide," Tonks's partner cut across sharply, giving her a meaningful look before turning back in obedient silence. Tonks shot her superior a questioning glance but went as well. The aura waited until the sound of their footsteps had faded before striding back the way he had come with purposeful steps. Without a second thought, James began to follow him. He believed there was no better way to know a person than to see what they did when they thought no one was watching, and Hyde had already roused enough of his suspicions to warrant investigating his hidden motives. He tailed him for several minutes along the empty corridors. A low rumble echoed faintly from far below the floor, telling James that the castle's residents had already gathered in the great hall for the feast, ghosts included. Even the people in the portraits had grouped together with their friends to celebrate Halloween, leaving no eyes to witness the aura's actions. On the fourth floor, Hyde went up to a faded wall hanging and slipped through the secret passage behind it. Knowing the passage, James broke into a run down the nearby staircase so as not to lose him when he emerged on the third floor. He reached the bottom just as a nearby door was quietly closing, the hospital wing. James's suspicion flared into a grim certainty. He burst into the hospital wing with a deafening squeal of hinges. Moonlight flooded the wide chamber with silver shadows, as though the world itself sensed something dark was coming and had moved the clouds to shed light on it. In the silver glow, the aura stood with wand drawn over one of the beds, where a fair-haired girl lay peacefully. James's intrusion cut the aura off mid-spell, and he snapped his head towards the door. In the moonlight, his eyes were slit like a serpent's and red as blood. James's blood froze. Shock and fear left him barely enough time to defend himself as the aura hurled a powerful curse at him. He cried out in pain when the curse met his counterspell in midair. His shoulder was wrenched from its socket by the force, sending electric shocks through his body and paralyzing him with agony. He managed to deflect the next curse only partially, and though it didn't hit him directly, it slammed him hard into the hospital wing's wall. He blacked out. When he came to, all the candles were lit and there was no sign of the aura. Madame Pomfrey was standing over the girl's bed, her face white. "Don't you dare move," she ordered as James tried to get up, groaning under the sharp pain in his arm. "I'll get to you the moment I know Miss Doyle is all right. Oh, poor child." "Did you see it? Did you see him?" James asked ungently, desperate to know that the man, or whatever he was, wouldn't get away with it. "I saw him," Madame Pomfrey replied gravely. "Help is on the way. I don't know what you were doing here, Potter, but it's quite possible you saved Bridget's life." Within minutes, Madame Pomfrey had set James's arm and given him a healing potion, and he proceeded to recount what he had seen to Dumbledore and McGonagall, who had arrived in the hospital wing with supernatural speed. The rumble of hundreds of voices shook the hospital wing's floor, telling James that the news had just reached the diners in the Great Hall. He knew it was only a matter of time before Lily found out he'd been involved. "Are you certain he was an aura?" McGonagall pressed him, lips tightly pursed. "That is a serious accusation to level at an employee of the Ministry of Magic, especially these days." I'm certain. His name's Hyde. I saw him giving orders to the other Aurors, James replied, not without a touch of triumph. At last they had evidence the ministry could not ignore regarding corruption within its ranks. I wouldn't be surprised if he was the one who broke into Lily's office and attacked those girls in the first place. McGonagall didn't look convinced. James briefly wondered where the other girl who'd been admitted to the hospital wing had gone, but the thought evaporated almost at once. McGonagall turned to Dumbledore and asked, "Perhaps Polyjuice Potion. What do you think, Dumbledore?" Dumbledore didn't appear to be about to answer. His bright eyes were clouded in deep and somber thought. At last he said, "Miss Doyle's father will surely be here soon. Madame Pomfrey, how is she?" "Hard to say," the matron replied in defeat. "She's uninjured, but it seems she can't be woken. It's not that she's in a coma, she's simply asleep. It seems like the effects of a memory or a mind-altering spell, but I have never seen anything like it. Headmaster, I'm going to have to call in a specialist from St. Mungo's." "Of course, spare no effort," Dumbledore said, just as the sound of hurried footsteps was heard outside the hospital wing's door. "Ah, right on time." The door opened, and Umbridge bustled in, her short legs carrying her in an anxious, awkward gait. Behind her came a tall, slender witch with long black hair and a pale, balding wizard who hurried straight to the girl's bedside. "Who is responsible for this?" he demanded hoarsely, his eyes misted with tears. "We do not yet know," Dumbledore replied calmly, though it was not the truth. "However, Madame Pomfrey and Mr. Potter saw the attacker, and their testimony will no doubt aid the Aurors in apprehending the culprit." "How very interesting," Umbridge cut in shrilly. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it, Mr. Potter? It seems you two have a habit of appearing as if by magic whenever something peculiar happens in this castle. In light of the horrific crime committed here, I'm sure Mr. Doyle will want to know precisely what reason you had for being at the castle tonight." "I wanted to visit my wife," James replied without flinching. "As far as I'm aware, that's not against the rules, but I'm flattered you remember me so fondly, Madam Umbridge." "No, it's not against the rules," Umbridge said, her eyes cold, like a toad focusing on catching a particularly fat fly. "And yet, I can't help but wonder why, if you say you intended to visit your wife, you were wandering the castle alone when this tragic event occurred." "She didn't want to see me," James lied smoothly. "Halloween was the night we died. I don't know if you're aware, but the whole thing was more or less my fault, so she wasn't exactly eager for my company. Not that I expect you to understand. You've never died." The last remark left even Umbridge speechless. "I suppose Mrs. Potter will corroborate your story," she said at last, not without resentment. "Of course," James replied calmly, knowing Lily was clever enough to understand what she ought to say once she heard what had happened. The Aurors then arrived to question them. Paying no heed to Mr. Doyle, still kneeling by his daughter's bed, James told them how it happened upon their commander slipping into the hospital wing and decided to follow, only to see him standing over the girl's bed with eyes red as blood. "How dare you?" Mr. Doyle burst into the questioning, his eyes red with tears. "What right have you to accuse a Ministry of Magic employee of attacking my daughter?" "I would never dream of doing such a thing," James replied evenly, though with coldness in his voice. He sympathized with the man's grief. He had children himself, after all, but he couldn't abide those who followed the ministry blindly. Why would a ministry employee want to harm your daughter? It's obvious this aura was under Voldemort's control. The name caused an uproar from Doyle and the Aurors. Umbridge watched with a cold, satisfied expression. She didn't need to waste her energy turning them against James. They were doing the job themselves, hurling words like traitor at him. At that point, the tall witch, who had been observing with a grave expression, intervened and offered to escort James out, to give Mr. Doyle some peace and prevent him from trying to land a few bare-fisted blows. "Thank you," he told her once they were outside the hospital wing. Only then, with the commotion behind a closed door, did he realize how tired he was and how much his arm ached. "You're welcome," the witch replied in a deep, articulate voice. "I'm Anita Mohari, chair of the school's parents' council." "Mohari," James repeated. The name sounded familiar. "My daughter, Margaret, was sorted into Gryffindor with Emily," Mrs. Mohari said, a spark of a smile crossing her serious face. Despite her position, her dark eyes were full of warmth. "It seems she and your daughter have become close friends." At that moment, Lily appeared from around the corner. "I heard what happened," she said shortly, hurrying to James and examining his injured arm. "Are you all right?" "It's just a simple fracture, nothing Madame Pomfrey couldn't fix," James replied lightly, trying to make it seem as though everything was fine. "At least the girl's still alive." Lily nodded in relief, but James knew the conversation would continue once they were alone. They returned to Grimmauld Place after Lily confirmed with McGonagall that Harry and Emily were safe in the Gryffindor common room. Word of what had happened seemed to have spread already, for Sirius and Remus were waiting for them in the kitchen, eager for news from Hogwarts. "I've met him once," Remus said after James told them how the red-eyed aura had slipped away once he'd lost consciousness. "He's Tonk's supervisor. He's a prat, the type who climbs the ladder too fast, but I wouldn't have thought he was a Death Eater." "The most dangerous people are the ones you wouldn't expect," Sirius said darkly. They all knew he was speaking of Wormtail. "He doesn't have to be a Death Eater," Lily said distantly. "The eye color changing, that's a strong sign of remote control through dark magic. Not the Imperious Curse, but something just as powerful and dangerous." The four of them fell into a pensive silence, each wondering what Voldemort's purpose had been in coming to Hogwarts and why he had tried to harm that girl. The silence was broken only when Tonks entered the kitchen, looking distant and troubled. "Tonks, how did you get in without waking my mother's portrait?" Sirius asked when he saw her. James realized he was right. He couldn't remember Tonks ever managing to enter the house without causing a commotion with her clumsiness. "Oh," she said vaguely, standing in the doorway in her aura robes. Her brown eyes were especially wide, making her look almost childlike. "What is it?" Remus asked, his expression darkening. "Is everything all right at Hogwarts?" "We found the other girl from the hospital wing," Tonks said in an odd tone. "Cho Chang. She was missing from the hospital wing during the attack, and no one could find her until she's dead. It was suicide." Chapter 31. Seeing What Others Can't. Ginny came down to the Great Hall on a wintry Saturday morning in November, bundled up in a warm jumper, gloves, and a hat. A bitter wind was blowing outside, and the sun was hiding behind a heavy layer of clouds threatening rain. Not the ideal day to hunt crumple-horned snorkax with Luna, but Ginny was more than happy to leave the gloomy castle for a few hours. The school had been in a state of mourning since Halloween. All those students who were walking around with downcast eyes in the corridors and talking in hushed voices didn't even know Cho Chang, and yet they mourned her fervently. Ginny wondered how everyone would have behaved if it had been an unpopular person who had died, but didn't share that thought with anyone. She scolded herself for the malicious notion. What happened to Cho, or rather, what she did to herself, was terrible beyond comprehension, and her memory deserved every sympathy possible, no matter her popularity. And yet, almost no one talked about the second girl who was hurt that same night, and was still under an enchanted sleep which was, according to rumor, unbreakable. Rumors about the nature of the event ran wild within the castle. An attack by a malicious ghost, a first-year meddling with magic she didn't understand, and even that she had been aware of some terrible secret and someone tried to keep her quiet about it. Luna was waiting for Ginny by the big fireplace in the entrance hall, wearing mismatched socks that reached her knees, a pair of hiking boots, and a yellow woolly hat. "Umbridge wouldn't let Dad come with us," she told Ginny as she joined her by the fireplace. "Seems she's still cross with him about wanting to write that piece on the attack. He's very disappointed. It could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see a real snorkack." Ginny, who had started to think that crumple-horned snorkacks were actually Mr. Lovegood's invention, changed the subject and said, "I'm surprised she's letting us go out at all, with everything that's going on. I'd have thought that the whole point of having a High Inquisitor was not letting students have any fun." "Oh, she didn't agree at first," Luna told her in a serene voice. "But Dad managed to convince her it would be educational. She said we could go out with Professor Grubblyplank and an escort from the ministry. Maybe she does actually care about our education after all." "Great, a ministry babysitter," Ginny muttered with an eye roll, not believing for a second that Umbridge cares about anyone but herself. "So when are we leaving?" "The escort needs to arrive, and Harry's not here yet either." Ginny remembered that Luna had invited Harry to join them on the hunt, but had hoped he'd forgotten. She was trying to tell Luna that he probably wouldn't come, just as he appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a thick, worn-out jumper. He joined them without really looking at Ginny. They hadn't spoken since their argument. In light of everything that had happened since, it felt like it had been ages ago, but Ginny still felt there was something unresolved between them. In hindsight, she felt a little bad for assuming he was trying to undermine her relationship with Michael. He was probably just trying to be friendly to her, and it's not like she and Michael were in a great place anyway. She was content to let him talk to Luna and pretend that nothing had happened between them. A group of chattering girls came out of the great hall. Ginny immediately noticed that these were her friends, or the girls who had until recently been her friends. To her dismay, they noticed her, and after a few whispers, Miranda separated from the group and walked towards her. "Oh, so you're talking to me now," Ginny threw at her before she could open her mouth. Miranda ignored her comment. "Can I speak with Ginny? Alone," she said to Harry and Luna, as if they weren't really worthy of her consideration. Luna looked as if she thought Miranda was as strange a creature as a crumple-horned snorkack. After a quick glance from Ginny, she and Harry moved away. "What do you want?" Ginny asked with rising anger. She and Miranda used to argue and make up regularly, but she had a feeling this time was different. "I have some juicy gossip," Miranda said sweetly. At that moment, she reminded Ginny of the girl she had known in her first year, long before they became friends. "Want to hear it?" When Ginny refused to cooperate, Miranda told her anyway. "I heard your boyfriend had a crush on Cho Chang." She whispered the name, as if it were some taboo. "Michael." "No, your other boyfriend," Miranda replied maliciously, gesturing towards where Harry and Luna were standing. Ginny rolled her eyes at her. "How many times do I have to tell you?" She told her friends he asked her to the Yule Ball last year, Miranda continued. She said no because Cedric Diggory had already asked her. But then Diggory died, and I heard Potter spoke to Cho when she was in the hospital wing just a few days before she died too. Spooky, isn't it? "I don't have to listen to this rubbish," Ginny stated and walked away. This was the weapon Miranda used against her enemies. She would plant seeds of self-doubt and insecurity in them, and Ginny wasn't going to let her get to her. But the words kept nagging at her. "I'm just saying, maybe you should be careful," Miranda called after her cheerfully, not bothering to lower her voice. Fighting the urge to cast the bat bogey hex on Miranda, knowing there might be teachers around, Ginny rejoined Harry and Luna by the castle door. They were no longer alone. They were standing with Professor Grubblyplank, who was wearing a long coat with many pockets, and another wizard, well-dressed and with neatly combed ginger hair. Ginny barely recognized Percy in his tailored winter robes and his new glasses. "What the fuck are you doing here?" she demanded of her elder brother, whom she hadn't seen since the beginning of the summer when he had left home and cut off all contact with the family. "Miss Weasley, language," Grubblyplank called in shock. 10 points from Gryffindor." "I was sent by the Ministry of Magic to accompany your outing," Percy replied formally, adjusting his glasses uncomfortably. "In light of the existing situation between me and the family, if you would prefer not to participate, I would completely understand." "You wish," Ginny retorted passionately, stepping out into the grey, freezing day. Let's go. Harry and Luna followed her immediately, and the responsible adults had no choice but to hurry after them. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, it had started to rain, and they went under the evergreen branches to escape it. The day was so cloudy that Grubbly-Plank and Percy lit small lights at the tips of their wands as they entered the forest. Luna began rummaging in her bag, taking out a sheet of parchment, a ball of wool, and an amber bead that only Merlin knew how they were supposed to help them find Crumplehorn's Snorkax. Meanwhile, Grubbly-Plank began to lecture them about the dangers of the forest. Ginny wasn't listening. The gloomy weather and the cawing of the crows among the branches only intensified her anger and misery. She felt Percy staring at her back and refused to acknowledge his existence. Why did he have to show up now, of all times, and make her want to punch him and cry about how he had left them without even saying goodbye? And why did she let Miranda drip her poison into her ear? Beyond the ugly and malicious theory Miranda had invented that Harry had something to do with what had happened to Cho, Ginny didn't want to hear that Harry once had a crush on her, or that he may still be in love with her today. Almost without meaning to, she looked at Harry and caught him looking back at her. He immediately averted his gaze, pretending to be interested in Grubbly-Plank's lecture on precautions to take in the forest. Something hot and squirming gnawed at Ginny from within, an almost sickening combination of anger and curiosity. Luna began to lead the way along the path with the mystical help of the parchment, wool, and amber, with Grubbly-Plank watching her with polite perplexity. Percy made sure to stay behind, a few steps away from the rest. Ginny found herself walking beside Harry. It was probably clear that she was feverishly thinking about how to ask him about what Miranda had said, because before she could, he asked her in a low voice, so Percy couldn't hear. What did she say about me? Why do you think we were talking about you? Ginny snapped in response. It's not all about you. True, Harry replied, not without annoyance. But you really were talking about me, weren't you? Well, yes, Ginny replied, and without looking at him added, she thinks you killed Cho Chang because she wouldn't go out with you, or something like that. Harry looked surprised and angry, and then despairing. That must mean half the school already thinks that. So it's true, Ginny blurted out. That I murdered her, Harry replied with unusual calmness. No, that. Suddenly Ginny didn't understand what she was doing. Why should she care about who Harry had a crush on? But she began to realize she couldn't escape the truth. She did care. She cared a lot. You really wanted to go out with Cho Chang? Well, yeah, a bit, Harry replied after a short, awkward silence, scratching the back of his neck. At least last year, not that it matters now. He slid his hands into his coat pockets with a gloomy expression. Ginny wanted to keep prying, but a feeling of pity stopped her. She didn't like the idea that Harry has a crush on Cho, but she realized it would be insensitive of her to keep pestering him about it. It wasn't enough that he had to see Diggory murdered. Now the girl he liked, or had liked, took her own life. It was undoubtedly a tragedy, and Ginny didn't understand why she was pushing herself to be a part of it. So you didn't visit her in the hospital wing after she was attacked? She asked after a few moments of silence, remembering Miranda's words. She couldn't be sure because of the twilight ambience in the forest, but it seemed to her that Harry was blushing. Yeah, I did visit her, he admitted, almost painfully. But I wasn't, he let out a faint sigh. That's not what I went for, but when I was there I realized how self-absorbed she was and… I don't know, all the feelings just disappeared. I hope you don't think it makes me a terrible person, seeing how she had, you know. I know what that's like, Ginny blurted out. She couldn't remember when her feelings towards Michael started to shift, but they did. I know what it's like when feelings change. You shouldn't feel bad about it. It wasn't your fault that she decided to end it. Harry gave her a hesitating yet grateful smile. He probably needed someone other than Ron and Hermione to tell him that he wasn't to blame, and maybe it was even more comforting for him to have it coming from her. They drifted into a slightly awkward silence. Ginny started thinking. If you didn't go to ask her out, why were you there? Maybe drop it. No, Ginny said, now even more determined to discover Harry's secret. Why did you go to visit her? But Harry was no longer listening to her. He was staring at something behind her, fascinated and threatened. Look, he whispered, pointing into the trees. Ginny turned around. There was nothing there but trees and some climbing shrubs. Very funny, she said. That's not going to work on me. I'm serious, Harry insisted, still fascinated by the empty space. Don't you see it? To most wizards, the Strals are invisible, Luna suddenly intervened, abandoning her search to approach the spot where Harry was looking and stroke something invisible. Only those who have witnessed a death can see them. That's probably why you've only started seeing them now. You can pet him if you want. Look, Miss Weasley. Grubbly Plank took Ginny aside and instructed her to look through a jagged piece of purple glass she had pulled out of one of her many pockets. Through the glass, Ginny saw for the first time a horse-like creature with a dragon's head and huge leathery wings standing right in front of her, watching Harry with white ghostly eyes as he approached and stroked its smooth neck with a hint of hesitation. They look a bit threatening, but they're very gentle animals, Grubbly Plank explained. We use them to pull the carriages that take the students from and to the train station. They're capable of flying long distances in a short time and without getting tired. Most of the students can't see them, so we don't teach about them before the owls. The care of magical creatures teacher allowed Ginny to take the purple glass and look through it while she stroked the Listral. It really was a very frightening creature, but its white eyes actually gave Ginny a sense of security, and its smooth, black hide was warm to the touch. I thought I was going mad, Harry admitted, so only Ginny and Luna heard him, sounding relieved. On the 1st of September, I didn't understand why nobody else could see them. The Listral licked his hand with a pale tongue. I guess you're more sane than people think, Ginny commented. Their eyes met, and Harry stifled a chuckle. Something in her heart opened at that moment. She knew more than ever that no matter what people said about him, she knew the truth. They continued on their way with the Listral accompanying them. Grubbly Plank went ahead to scan the rest of the path, which had meanwhile become narrow, winding, and barely visible between the roots and trunks. Percy, who had started to look paler and paler as they went on, walked a safe distance behind, probably afraid of the Listral. Luna was busy with the amber light on her empty map. Ginny leaned towards Harry and whispered, "Don't think for a second I've forgotten." "We'll talk about it later," Harry hissed in reply, so Grubbly Plank wouldn't hear. "It's serious." Ginny stifled her curiosity. If Harry was trying to deter her with that statement, he only made her more interested. "We're starting to get deep into the forest," Grubbly Plank said from the front. "Is it still far?" she asked Luna. "Not far," Luna replied calmly. Grubbly Plank gave her a doubtful look. She seemed to be debating whether to allow them to risk it based on Luna's amber and parchment. "We should have encountered more Listrals from the herd," she said in a thoughtful tone. "They only roam alone rarely." The words made Ginny realize how quiet it was in the forest. She expected to hear at least the chirping of birds, but there was nothing, not even the sound of rain dripping on the canopies. "This is foolish," Percy raised his voice, speaking for the first time since they had entered the forest. "We should go back." "Please, we're close, really," Luna pleaded with him. "Don't be a prat, Percy," Ginny added. "What's the rush?" "That's enough," Grubbly Plank intervened before Ginny could say anything else cheeky. "I need to figure out where all the Listrals have gone. Their breeding ground isn't far from here. Maybe they're gathered there." "We'll wait here," Percy stated authoritatively, but to Ginny's ears, he sounded like the same boy whose only ambition was to be a prefect. "It's safer on the path. Take Potter with you, and the girls and I will wait for you here." Grubbly Plank pondered his words. She probably didn't want to argue with Umbridge's representative. "If there's a problem, send up a jet of red sparks and I'll come running back," she instructed Percy. "Come on, Potter." Harry looked towards Ginny and followed the care of magical creatures teacher. Ginny was left with a hint of disappointment. They waited on the path for some time. Luna found a place to sit on a lichen-covered rock, stroking the invisible head of the Thistral, which was now resting its head on her lap like a loyal pet. Ginny started to shiver slightly. Until now, the walk had warmed her up, but the chill of the forest had started to seep into her. "Ginny," Percy said suddenly, making her jump, "I need to talk to you, alone." Ginny considered refusing or demanding that he talk in front of Luna. The truth was that since the morning she had been afraid, he would try to use the opportunity to talk to her alone. She didn't trust herself to control her emotions if he started talking about his leaving. Finally, with a mix of reluctance and curiosity, she followed Percy behind a nearby tree, not far from where Luna was sitting. "How are you getting on with your studies?" was the first thing Percy asked her. "Brilliantly," Ginny replied sarcastically. Percy pursed his lips. "I understand you're a little bit cross." "A little bit cross." Ginny didn't bother to speak quietly. Her voice must have been heard throughout the forest. "You left in the dead of night without even saying goodbye, all because you and Dad disagreed on something. And if that's not bad enough, you kicked Mum out when she tried to reconcile with you in the summer. So yes, I'm a little bit cross. Just tell me what you want." "Fine," Percy shot back, stiffening his posture. "I wrote to Ron about this at the start of the term, but I see that you need my advice just as much as he does." "What are you talking about?" "I've noticed that you and Potter have become closer," Percy said with difficulty. "I feel it's my duty, as your older brother, to warn you not to get involved with someone like him." "Fuck you, Percy," Ginny shot rudely. He turned red with embarrassment and anger. "Someone like him? And since when do you call him Potter? You used to spend the summers together, or have you forgotten?" "That was before I knew the truth about him and his family," Percy said sternly. "What truth? That he's a dark wizard and a serial killer? Or that he's a spoilt, lying, attention-seeking brat? It's a bit hard to keep track of all the truths. Besides, as far as I remember, he was the one who saved me from the Chamber of Secrets. I didn't see you or the ministry there that night." Percy was left pale and speechless after his sister's sharp words. Ginny felt a fleeting hint of guilt that disappeared immediately. "You're right," Percy said, surprising her. "I should have watched over you better, but I was too wrapped up in myself." The confession left Ginny stunned. The last thing she expected Percy to do was apologize to her. She didn't have time to think of a reply, or even to understand how she felt about all of this, when the silence of the forest was broken by a sharp animal shriek, and then a human scream, terrified and hurt. "Luna!" Ginny cried, forgetting Percy and running back to the path. The animal shriek sounded again, deafening and almost heartbreaking. Luna was sprawled on the ground, her wand in her hand, and on the other side of the path, a wizard was lying, looking as if he were defending himself from an invisible attack. Ginny ran to Luna, feeling immediate relief to see that she was breathing. The person on the ground finally managed to get to his feet and began a defensive flight. In a flash, Ginny's wand was in her hand, ordering a green bat bogey that pulled itself out of the man's nose and then turned to attack him viciously. Harry and Grubblyplank arrived at the scene, running, their wands drawn and ready. "We heard the Thistrals shriek," Grubblyplank panted, her eyes darting between the paralyzed Luna in Ginny's arms and the snot-covered man on the path. Finally, she collected herself enough to go to Luna and remove the jinx from her. "Leave me alone," she screamed hysterically when the paralysis wore off, startling Ginny. She hugged her frightened friend tightly, promising her that it was over and everything was all right. "What happened here, Miss Lovegood? Who is this man?" Grubblyplank questioned the trembling girl. "I don't know," Luna replied, a hint of tears welling in her large eyes. He just ambushed me out of nowhere. I don't know what he wanted, but the Thistral protected me from him. And what about you, Mr. Weasley? Didn't you see what happened? Ginny looked sharply at her brother. Suddenly she realized that he was supposed to be the responsible adult, but while Luna's attacker was about to escape, he hadn't lifted a finger to stop him and hadn't even sent the red sparks as Grubbly-Plank had asked. This must be some kind of misunderstanding, Percy replied calmly, but he looked pale and a little sweaty despite the cold. That's got to be a really big misunderstanding, Harry said suddenly. He was standing over the man, who had stopped struggling with the bat bogey that was now resting on his face and was lying motionless. Look at his uniform. This bloke's an aura. Dumbledore arrived at the scene within minutes, even though the castle was at least an hour's walk away, with McGonagall following him. After that, everything happened so fast that Ginny barely had time to understand what was going on. Dumbledore questioned Luna gently but briskly about what had happened, and without providing any confirmation or explanation, he created a portkey from a worn-out stone and asked everyone present to come closer and touch it so they could return safely to the castle. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore had time to question everyone involved in the incident and release Harry and Grubbly-Plank on their way. Ginny didn't miss the hint of rage in Harry's eyes when the headmaster released him without even looking at him. Then Umbridge arrived at the scene, disheveled and haggard. It seemed that no one had bothered to inform her what had happened. "Ah, Mrs. Umbridge, you've arrived just in time," Dumbledore said matter-of-factly, getting up from his seat to re-examine the aura, who was now lying on the sofa in front of the fireplace with snot in his hair. "It seems to me that you might know this man." Umbridge's toad-like eyes bulged slightly, but otherwise she showed no sign that she was surprised to see him. "Another fallen aura, Dolor's," Dumbledore said in a deep, silky voice that filled Ginny with awe. "Or perhaps he was sent to harm Miss Lovegood in a secluded spot, to frighten her father so he would stop publishing his honest opinions about the ministry in his newspaper." "That's why they sent you," Ginny said out loud before she could stop herself. Everyone looked at her, but she was looking at Percy, who was sitting hunched and pale in a chair. "So you'd have an excuse to keep me away from Luna." 10 points from Gryffindor, Miss Weasley, for disrespecting a Ministry of Magic employee, Umbridge said in a grating voice. Percy lowered his gaze when she spoke, and Ginny knew he felt guilty. "Now get out, both of you." Ginny and Luna both looked at Dumbledore. "You may return to your common rooms, Miss Weasley and Miss Lovegood. Thank you for your help," he said. "What will you do with him?" Ginny asked, gesturing to the aura. "You won't let him get away with it, will you, Professor?" "Out, I said," Umbridge shrieked, her rage fanned with every word Ginny said. At that moment, McGonagall intervened to escort them out of the office and closed the door behind them, not before sternly reminding them that they must return to their common rooms immediately. Ginny tried to listen through the door, but soon realized the office was soundproofed and allowed Luna to drag her down the winding stairs. Harry was waiting for them by the griffin statue. Ginny tried hard to look surprised to see him. She had no doubt that he would wait for her to come out. Ginny told him about Dumbledore's theory while they accompanied Luna, who was quiet and troubled after the events, to the Ravenclaw common room. "That's why she agreed to let us go, but without Dad," she said suddenly in a small voice. She looked betrayed by the thought that the Snorkack hunt had been used for a plot against her father. Finally, with a hug and a promise that everything would be all right, Luna went into her common room, and Harry and Ginny were left alone. "You have to teach me that bat bogey hex," he said, as they started walking towards the Gryffindor common room. Ginny wouldn't have been surprised if he had planned what to say to her the whole time he was waiting outside. "Handy, isn't it?" Ginny replied. "To be honest, I've never used it in a real case of need. I have to admit, it looks like a fun hex to use." "It really is fun. Now stop evading and just tell me already." Harry looked as if he was about to make an excuse, but under Ginny's demanding gaze, he gave in almost immediately. Well, the reason I went to visit Cho was I wanted to ask her what she remembered from the night she was attacked, if she saw something. And what did she say? She said that she saw Cedric's ghost. Well, she insisted it wasn't his ghost, but you know what I mean. Maybe that's what made her, you know. But that's not what you wanted to hear, was it? Ginny concluded, starting to get more interested in the story. Harry started to look uncomfortable. What did you want her to say she saw? Come on, you're always coming up with theories with Ron and Hermione. I want in too. Harry blushed slightly in the torchlight, and he gave in without her even having to try. I wanted to know if she saw Voldemort that night, he said without looking at her. She shivered secretly but didn't let him see. Because I saw him during the second attack, but not how he looks today. He looked like he did when he was young, like he was in the Chamber of Secrets. The words caught in Ginny's throat and were lost. Harry continued to speak. Before Halloween, I wanted to tell you, but at the last minute, I changed my mind. I realized you don't need to live in fear because of something I saw or maybe imagined when I have no proof. I'm not afraid. Ginny's voice returned to her to defy his statement. The chamber isn't going to happen again, not to me. You're right, Harry said, clearly not knowing what to say. I was just looking out for you. I can look after myself. I know that now. I've seen what you're capable of. This comment immediately softened Ginny's annoyance. There were very few people she felt really saw her, and now she realized that maybe Michael had never been one of those people. But maybe Harry was. They reached the Gryffindor dorms too quickly. Knowing that everyone had probably already heard what had happened in the forest and that the common room would be full of gossiping students, she pulled Harry into a cramped alcove behind a nearby statue. What are you going to do? She asked him. You think that girl Bridget is connected to to Voldemort. I don't know, he replied heavily, as if he had suddenly forgotten how to speak. The alcove really was quite cramped. It's not like we can go and ask her, but someone definitely wanted her to keep quiet about something. You never seem to really know what you're doing, she teased him. That's what I'm trying to explain to everyone all the time, but no one seems to listen, he replied with an embarrassed smile, making her smile back. With the clear knowledge that she wasn't going to move from there before she kissed him, she threw caution to the wind and did it. The kiss was hesitant, almost sloppy, but it was real, more real than any kiss she'd had before, full of raw emotion. It was like that time they hid together under the invisibility clock over the summer, like they shifted into a different world, where they didn't need words to communicate, and it was the most natural thing. To Ginny, the kiss felt special, almost magical, like it was her first. And to Harry it probably was. It was painfully obvious he didn't have any idea what to do with his hands. She thought his inexperience was endearing. She ended the kiss too soon, reluctantly. Harry looked at her as if she were absolutely the only thing in the world. She loved it. There's something I have to do, she said, moving away from him unwillingly. Wait for me in the common room. She gave him a quick kiss on the lips and started to run. Her heart was pounding as she jogged to the library. She felt her face burning, and she was smiling uncontrollably and happy that no one was there to see it. She found Michael at his favorite table in the library. His tendency to spend every free minute of the day studying made finding him incredibly simple, and him incredibly predictable and boring. Michael, she began breathlessly, standing over his table. Hey, he replied in surprise. Where have you been all day? Ginny had told him she was going out to the forest with Luna, but she hadn't expected him to remember. I want to break up, she said unceremoniously. He looked genuinely shocked. But why? An ugly expression came over his face. It's because of Potter, isn't it? Maybe it is, Ginny replied out loud. She was tired of living a lie. You and I have nothing in common, and to be honest, you're a bit of a git. So maybe I'll give you what you've wanted all this time and actually go be with Harry. She left before Madame Pince could arrive to scold her for the noise, leaving Michael alone with the books. Chapter 32. seek and destroy. The Ministry of Magic had become a hornet's nest over the course of November. It's not that it had been a particularly pleasant place before, at least in Tonk's opinion. But after Umbridge was stripped of her High Inquisitor of Hogwarts title, things became much worse. The air was thick with bitterness and distrust. No one in the ministry particularly liked Umbridge, as she was known to be two-faced and cared about nothing but her own ambition, yet there seemed to be a feeling that she had been treated unfairly. She had been stripped of her title at Hogwarts after the Board of Governors pressured Fudge to hold someone responsible for all of the strange occurrences and attacks that had taken place at Hogwarts since the start of term. Rumors around the ministry said that Dumbledore had somehow influenced the board to do that, in order to regain his control over the school. Tonks had always wondered where rumors in the ministry came from, as they seemed to be frequent and very detailed. Kingsley and Arthur had both been suspecting for years that many of these rumors had been spread deliberately by someone in Fudge's office. The fact that they both had the same inclination before they had joined the Order solidified that suspicion now. Two major opinions dominated the conversation. One was that the attack on the daughter of Xenophilius Lovegood, the owner and editor of the notoriously eccentric Quibbler, was made up in order to sell more copies of the paper. The other was that an Auror did approach Miss Lovegood, but only to try to get her to relay a friendly warning to her father not to get involved with dangerous figures such as Dumbledore and Harry Potter, and the interaction was wrongly interpreted as an aggressive act. In the Auror office, the employees were exceptionally bitter. It was the second time one of them had been accused of a crime in the span of a month, and it didn't help that Hyde had gone underground following the attack at Hogwarts on Halloween, without giving an explanation for his actions, and they had to send their own to search for their adored commander. The suspicion within the office was higher than ever. From the moment Umbridge had been banished from Hogwarts, she made it her life's work to find out anyone who had even the slightest doubt about Fudge's agenda and get them fired. A witch from the Department of Magical Sports had been fired from her job for saying that she used to enjoy reading the Quibbler when she was younger. After that, no one dared to voice any sort of opinion that wasn't part of the party line. Tonks and the other Order members who worked in the ministry now had to be more careful than ever. Unfortunately for Tonks, being careful was never her strong suit. Visits to the offices of high-ranking ministry officials had become a routine and tiresome part of Tonks's life at that point. Yet she felt especially tense as she was led to the office of the Minister for Magic himself on a day at the end of November. In recent weeks, she had been frequently questioned by her superiors as part of the investigation into Hyde, and later in the investigation into Raymond, who had been the one who had assaulted Lovegood's daughter. But this was the first time she had been summoned for a personal conversation with the Minister for Magic. She couldn't help but expect the worst. Dumbledore had tasked her with visiting Raymond in the holding cell where he was being kept on level 8, awaiting trial before the Wisengamot, and trying to persuade him to admit that he had not acted of his own accord, but on the orders of senior figures within the ministry. Dumbledore had hoped that the fact his superiors had abandoned him to face the charges alone would encourage Raymond to reveal the truth. So far, however, he had refused to listen to his colleague and save himself. Tonks had always known that the ministry was important to Raymond, but she had never imagined he would go to Azkaban for it. Now she was convinced that he had already told someone about her attempts to persuade him, and that the minister suspected her of disloyalty to the ministry. But when she stepped into the spacious office, carpeted in green and with wooden walls adorned with portraits of former ministers for magic, she found Fudge smiling at her and sipping tea. "Ah, Aura Tonks, sit down, please," he said pleasantly, and the teapot poured her a second cup. "You wanted to speak to me, Minister?" she asked tensely, desperate to receive her sentence and be done with it. "Indeed," Fudge replied briskly. "I couldn't help but notice your meteoric rise in the department, from a low-ranking Aura to an important member of the special unit." Thank you, sir, Tonks replied robotically, knowing it wasn't true. In light of that, and your familiarity with the former Aura and wanted man, Jackson Hyde, I've decided to send you on a mission of great importance to capture the wizard in question and bring him to justice. Tonks was taken aback. This was not what she had expected to hear. But I thought the entire department was searching for him. That's true, Fudge replied, and Tonks caught a hint of impatience in his voice. But we believe Hyde is evading us thanks to contacts within the department. Therefore, we've decided to send you on a solo mission. Highly classified, I should stress. Tonks didn't know what to say. Something in the minister's small, watery eyes made her feel that something was wrong. Why me? She dared to ask. There are far more experienced auras. They're all friends of Hyde, Fudge cut her off. That's why it has to be you. You understand that, don't you? Tonks could do nothing but nod. Everything you need to know is here, Fudge went on, and a thick parchment scroll bearing the Aura office seal appeared on the desk between them. Go home now and speak to no one. Your superiors have been informed. You'll start at first light tomorrow. Realizing she had been given no room to refuse, Tonks took the scroll and headed for the door in silence. I remind you, Aura Tonks, that this mission is highly confidential, Fudge said behind her. Tell no one, is that clear? Of course, Tonks replied faintly and left. As the minister had ordered, she took the lift down and headed straight for the flue, moving as if under a spell. She felt as though everyone were watching her, and she was certain that some passers-by actually were. Tense and trying to behave normally, she took the flue to her flat. In her sitting room, she shrugged off her Aura's robes and turned to look out of the window. The London street was empty, save for a few pigeons lined up on a nearby lamp-post. Knowing Auras had subtle ways of keeping watch, she drew the curtains. In the dark, she thought feverishly about what to do. Auras never went out into the field without a briefing, yet Fudge had sent her off with a scroll and told her not to tell anyone where she was going. He said her superiors were informed, but right before that he had said Hyde had contacts within the department, so surely it made no sense to let his friends from the special unit know about this highly classified operation. Mad-Eye had taught her to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her something was wrong. After a few failed attempts, she managed to cast the charm she had used at 17 to sneak out of her parents' house, one that made them think she was still in her room when she wasn't. A faint shadow moved about the room, giving anyone looking in the impression that someone was inside. Then she rummaged through her wardrobe in search of the shabbiest coat and loudest boots she owned. She donned the disguise, adding a woolen hat and thick scarf, then paused to focus. Her face and hair roots tingled, and when she looked in the mirror again, an elderly, gaunt woman stared back at her. She left the building and began walking towards the underground station, playing the part of a frail old muggle. At the end of the street, she spotted a man in a long raincoat whom she recognized from the department, watching her flat from a distance. She passed him with a lowered gaze, and he didn't even bother to glance her way. Once she had left the underground and was certain she was no longer being followed, she began running towards Grimold Place. She swept into headquarters like a storm, somehow managing not to trip over the umbrella stand or wake Mrs. Black. She went straight down to the kitchen. Remus and Sirius were seated at the table in the middle of what looked like a serious conversation. The moment Tonks entered, they leapt to their feet, wands drawn. After a particularly tense moment, Remus lowered his wand hesitantly. Remembering she was still disguised, Tonks gave her head a small shake and returned to her true appearance. I didn't remember you having a mission today, Sirius said, putting his wand away in relief. I don't, Tonks said, out of breath. I think I've been exposed. Are you sure? Remus asked, still on his feet. Tonks told them what had happened in Fudge's office and about the aura outside her flat. What about the scroll he gave you? Tonks fumbled through the many pockets of her coat. She had completely forgotten about the instructions, but to her relief, she remembered to bring this crucial piece of information with her. She broke the seal, and the three of them divided the few sheets between them and began to read. Most of the information seemed to concern Hyde's past, not necessarily his current activities. Tonks hadn't known his mother was a Muggle, or that the identity of his father was not known, but that he may have been a Death Eater who had served Voldemort in the First War and died in Azkaban. "Here it is," Sirius's voice cut through the rustling parchment. "A list of places he's been spotted since the attack. Let's see. First sighting was 2 days after the attack in a village south of Hogwarts. Then 3 days later he was spotted on a Muggle street in a town north of there." Why would he go back north? Tonks wondered aloud. 5 days after the attack, the Auras widened the search perimeter. They always do that. Hyde knows it. So why risk returning and getting caught? Maybe someone else was telling him what to do, Remus replied darkly. "The last sighting was over a week ago on the east coast of Scotland," Sirius finished, flipping the parchment in search of more. "Well, at least we know where you need to go." "It's obviously a trap," Remus said. "Which is exactly why we should go there and set one of our own." "Don't be ridiculous." "You know I'm right," Sirius insisted. "What's she supposed to do? Go back to the Ministry and tell the Fudge she just doesn't feel like carrying out his mission? She wouldn't make it out of there alive." "Sirius," Remus almost growled. "I'm sorry, Tonks, but it's true." Sirius turned to her, eyes burning. "If they really are trying to get rid of you under the pretense of some highly classified mission, I don't think you can go back there. Not until Fudge is out of office, at least." Tonks said nothing. She was ashamed to admit that Sirius's words made her feel relief rather than fear. "That doesn't mean we should charge straight into a trap. And for what?" Remus returned to his original question. "To get back at a few Auras who are only following orders. What would that achieve?" Sirius fell silent, perhaps beginning to realize he had spoken rashly. "We need to call an order meeting," Remus ended the argument. He looked over at Tonks, his expression softening slightly. "Don't worry, everything will be all right." It didn't seem, however, that all members of the Order shared that opinion. Hester Jones voiced grave concern for Tonks's safety, repeatedly reminding everyone of what had happened to their friends in the First Order when their identities were exposed. Snape merely expressed dissatisfaction that the Order had lost an asset within the Ministry of Magic, and added that he was unsure how useful Tonks would be to them now. "That will do," said Dumbledore in a calm, measured voice, and everyone fell instantly silent. "We all remember the events of the First War, Hestia, which is why this time we shall learn from the mistakes of the past and take steps to ensure Nymphadora's safety." "How can you be sure you've been exposed?" Elphia's Doge asked Tonks for the 5th time. "Perhaps you're overreacting." "I trained her well, Doge, so sit down and let Dumbledore speak," growled Mad-Eye. "Thank you, Alastair," Dumbledore continued. "I think we all agree that it would be best to let the situation settle and avoid attempting to lure the Ministry into a trap." He looked towards Sirius, who seemed on the verge of rolling his eyes. "Nevertheless, I believe this situation could be turned to our advantage. I remind you that Aurahide is very likely under the control of Lord Voldemort, even if he hasn't shared this information with his supporters." Now he looked towards Snape, who claimed that even the Death Eaters themselves were no less baffled by the attack on Hogwarts, and that Voldemort himself had remained silent when he had heard the news. "If we find him, we may be able to uncover Death Eater hideouts, or perhaps even gain insight into Voldemort's plans." A murmur of interest rippled among the Order. "The clues we've had so far are few, and it may be many months before there is any progress," Dumbledore cautioned. "Nymphadora, for the time being you cannot return to the Ministry or to your home. This also means you must have no contact with anyone outside the Order, not even your parents. Do you understand?" Tonks, who had until then been wrapped in a blessed numbness, had to endure everyone's eyes on her as she gave a heavy nod. "I must admit that, for the first time in quite a while, I agree with Minister Fudge on one thing, Dumbledore went on, a spark of pride in his eyes. You are indeed the witch most suited to capture Jackson Hyde. Tomorrow you will assemble a team of 3 Order members to assist you in his capture. Any objections? No one spoke. Snape looked at Dumbledore with open doubt, but no one could think of a reason to disagree. Sirius caught Tonks's eye and winked at her. She forced herself to give a small smile in return. In that case, it's settled, Dumbledore concluded. Good night, and take care of yourselves. Tonks rose with the others, and without saying a word to anyone left the kitchen and headed upstairs. She hadn't had the chance to process everything that had happened, and felt as if her thoughts were overflowing and threatening to drown her. Tonks, wait. She hadn't even realized she was on the verge of tears until she heard Remus behind her on the stairs to the first floor. She gathered herself again, holding on until she could be alone. Are you all right? He asked with genuine concern. Yes, she replied, and at the doubtful look in his eyes added, really. Lately, especially since that night, I've been tempted to resign almost every day. Truth is, I'd rather dislike the job from the start, so maybe it's for the best. I thought being an Auror was your dream. It was, she answered quickly. Or at least I thought it was. I wanted to be an Auror to help people, fight the dark forces and all that. But all I found myself doing was polishing sneakoscopes and chasing the wrong people. Maybe it won't always be like that, Remus said, trying to encourage her. He was good at that. One day you could go back, and maybe things will change by then. Thanks, she said, and without thinking too much, hugged him. She still remembered how comforting his embrace had been after that night at the ministry, and at that moment, her need for that sense of safety outweighed her pride. Good night, she murmured after a few seconds, hurrying up the stairs, feeling she could no longer hold back her tears. She slipped into the nearest guest room and locked the door behind her. Alone in the darkness, she allowed a few tears to escape. She lay down on the nearest bed and let exhaustion claim her. She woke to a bright winter sun and the scents of bacon and coffee. She had been so tired the night before she hadn't even removed her boots before falling asleep. The events of the previous day were still fresh in her mind, as though she had spent the entire night turning them over. But in the light of day, everything seemed a little less dire. She would be safe at Grimmauld Place, surrounded by people she loved. Someone from the Order would let her parents know she was safe, and she wouldn't have to see her colleagues' grey faces for the foreseeable future. The house felt cool and empty, but in the kitchen, a warm fire blazed in the hearth. Sirius was at the stove, wearing what must have been Marley's apron, while Remus and James sat at the table. Good morning, James greeted her warmly. Remus smiled, though he didn't quite meet her eyes. She, too, preferred to pretend last night's moment of weakness had never happened. Tonks, just in time, Sirius called, levitating plates piled with eggs and bacon onto the table. Sit down. You must be starving. Why are you being so nice to me? Tonks asked as she took her seat. You never cook. I'm always nice to you, Sirius said with mock innocence, heaping her plate and filling her mug with steaming coffee. Besides, can't I look after my cousin out of pure kindness? He wants to join your team, Remus said. Tonks had almost forgotten about the task Dumbledore had given her, to assemble a team of Order members and track down Hyde. Truth is, we were talking about it last night, James admitted. Most of the Order can't abandon their jobs and assignments, so you're pretty much left with the 3 of us, unless you'd rather take Marley instead of Sirius. I'm considering it, Tonks said, aiming a jab at Sirius. Very funny, he retorted. Come on, you don't think I proved myself on that mission with Moony? The second there was a hint the ministry was nearby, I bolted. And besides, as a dog I can see and hear things you can't. All right, Tonks agreed at last, partly because she thought Sirius deserved a breath of fresh air now and then, and partly because she genuinely believed he'd be useful. But if we get even the slightest suspicion, I'll abandon you without a second thought, Sirius finished cheerfully, heading off to fetch another helping of sausages. James looked satisfied as he sipped his coffee. Remus looked worried, but said nothing. After breakfast, once the plates and mugs had been cleared away, they spread across the table the parchments Tonks had received from Fudge, along with a map of the area where Hyde had last been seen. Tonks looked at her three companions, and for the first time fully realized that three skilled wizards were sitting there, waiting for her to tell them what to do. She had dreamed of one day leading an Aura team at the Ministry, but she'd never truly believed it would happen. "Well," she began, though she wasn't sure what she was about to say. "It says here Hyde was spotted near the east coast by a group of Muggle birdwatchers who saw him on one of the cliffs. They reported he seemed agitated, talking to himself, and didn't respond when spoken to. That's not typical behavior for someone under the Imperious curse. They're usually cold and detached," Sirius said. "I don't think he was under Imperious that night," James said. "I told you his eyes were red, like Voldemort's." No one asked how he knew what Voldemort's eyes looked like. "I'm sure Voldemort knows enough dark magic to make someone obey him, even without the Imperious," Remus said, steering the topic onwards. "We won't know until we find him and learn what's controlling him." The only place to start was where Hyde had last been seen, though they expected Auras to be lying in wait for Tonks there. That wouldn't be much of a problem so long as she stayed in disguise, and as long as Sirius could be trusted not to try biting one of them. They apparated to a small wood near the coast and made their way on foot, not to the cliffs, but to the nearby village, intending to gather intelligence before heading out. The winter day was bitterly cold, a few snowflakes drifting down now and then. Their heavy coats and hats helped them blend in among the Muggles. To avoid attracting attention, they split into pairs. Remus immediately volunteered to take Padfoot round the village, leaving Tonks with James. She decided there was no reason to make anything of it and scolded herself for not focusing on the mission. Tonks and James searched the main streets and the market, while Remus took Padfoot, who seemed to be fighting the urge to tear off his collar, down the back lanes between houses. They blended in well with the few passers-by. Tonks disguised as a brunette woman in her 40s, James hidden under a black woolen beanie and thick-rimmed glasses. They walked in silence. Normally, conversation between them flowed easily, but now it felt as though there was something unspoken between them. Tonks had the sense it wasn't necessarily to do with the mission. "Listen, Tonks, we need to talk." "All right," she replied, not without a hint of wariness. What serious subject could James, of all people, possibly have with her? "It's about Remus." Tonks was taken aback. Unbidden, she felt her cheeks grow warm and hoped it was cold enough that James wouldn't notice. "What about him?" "You've probably realized by now that Mooney likes you, and it seems you like him too." Tonks was surprised, embarrassed, and a little annoyed, though everything he said was true. "What, you're going to warn me not to hurt his feelings?" she shot back. "I'm serious," James said, and he really did look serious. "You're both adults, and no one should interfere in your business. But you need to understand, Remus has been hurt many times by women who couldn't accept his condition or who tried to, but in the end couldn't handle it and left." It was one of the saddest things Tonks had ever heard. She didn't know what to say. "What I'm trying to say is, if you're not absolutely sure you want to be with him, put an end to his hopes now," James went on, his tone grim. "Don't get me wrong, I'm all for it's better to have loved and lost, and all that. I just want to spare you both needless pain." Tonks didn't know what to say, and at the same time wanted to say a great deal. She wanted to decide then, and there to forget the whole thing. It probably wasn't wise to get involved with someone in the Order, who was also a werewolf and 13 years her senior, and James made it all sound so final and serious. And yet she couldn't quite push the thought of herself and Remus together out of her mind. Their conversation was cut short when they noticed a crowd gathered outside a shop, with a Muggle police car parked in front. "This looks serious," James murmured, rifling through his coat as they approached the gathering. Do what I do. They slipped politely through the crowd, ducked under the bright yellow tape strung across the doorway, and entered the crime scene. The first thing Tonks noticed, the first thing anyone would notice, were the two bodies lying on the floor just inside, in front of the counter. There wasn't a drop of blood, but there was no doubt they were dead. The second thing she noticed was a wand lying abandoned on the linoleum floor, jarringly out of place. Interpol, James said to a police officer who looked ready to throw them out, flashing what to Tonks looked like a blank piece of parchment. What have we got here? The officer, still staring at the parchment as if he couldn't believe his eyes, jumped and began reporting at once. Shopkeeper called it in. He'd gone into the back for a moment, and when he returned, he found these two. They weren't in the shop before, and no one on the street saw them come in. Stranger still, there's no sign of an attack. They just dropped dead. What are the odds two people have heart attacks at the same time? May I? James asked politely, though with a touch of impatience. Tonks had already realized they had died from the killing curse, and that the ministry would likely be there soon. The officer stepped back in awe to let them pass. Had the scene not been so grim, Tonks might have found it funny. The only other time Tonks had seen a dead body up close was in advanced magical forensics training at the Aura Academy, and even then it had turned her stomach. She looked into the blank eyes of the dead, and beneath the mask of death she recognized them. Though dressed as Muggles, they were both members of the special unit. She took care not to look up too sharply, instead signaling to James. Any suspects? James asked the officer. Witnesses saw a scruffy-looking man leaving the place in a hurry around the time it happened, the officer said. Shopkeeper saw him come in, nervous sort, wild hair, muttering to himself. Thank you, James said after a quick glance at Tonks. Good work, keep it up. He patted the man on the shoulder and left. Tonks followed quickly as the officer flushed with pride. They were special unit auras, she whispered to James as they moved away. And the man he described, that has to be Hyde. Who else could have taken them both in a duel? Were these the auras supposedly sent to kill her? That means the ministry will be here any moment. James was already pulling out the enchanted mirror to contact Remus. In the best-case scenario, we've got 15 minutes, Tonks said, trying to recall special unit protocols. They've got a spell they use to detect dark magic, but it's only effective for a few minutes after the curse is cast. Then you'd better hurry. I'll tell Mooney to meet us on the way. After a few tense attempts, Tonks managed to cast the spell. A faint green trail, barely visible, stretched away down the street from the shop. They moved quickly, resisting the urge to run. Remus and Padfoot caught up after 2 streets. By then the green haze had almost vanished, but Padfoot seemed able to sense it. He wagged his tail, barked, startling a few passers-by, and began pulling Remus forward. Padfoot led them to a forgotten shack at the far end of a quiet back garden. And there, sitting on the dusty floor in the gloom, was none other than Hyde. Tonks didn't recognize him at first. There was no trace of the handsome, charismatic aura he'd been until recently. He was gaunt, injured, his eyes sunken, his face and hair filthy. He didn't even acknowledge them when they intruded on his hiding place. I don't want to, they heard him mumble into his hands. Please, I'm scared. Hyde, Tonks asked cautiously. Hyde started, eyes wide, his wand already in his hand. Remus disarmed him before he could attack. Hyde, it's me, Tonks, she said gently, as though soothing a wounded animal. From the ministry, remember. Recalling she was still in disguise, she returned to her usual appearance. Tonks, he muttered, his bloodshot eyes focusing on her face. Her name seemed to stir something behind the cloud of madness. He pressed himself to the wall of the shack, taut with tension. His voice broke as he asked, Did they send you to kill me too? No, I'm here to help you, Tonks said, daring to move a little closer. I want to help. What happened to you? To her astonishment, Hyde burst into tears, barely propped against the wall. I didn't want to do it. Please, they were my friends, Tonks. It wasn't me. Padfoot began to growl at the door, warning that someone was approaching. Let's get out of here, James said. Tonks stepped towards Hyde and laid a gentle hand on his arm, intending to apparate with him. In response, he gripped her arm and shook with silent sobs. She had never liked Hyde, but her heart twisted to see him so broken and lost. There was nothing left of the man he had once been. What could have made him break like that? They apparated together, only they didn't arrive at headquarters. The four of them, including Hyde, found themselves on the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking a raging ocean, the town not far behind them. Sea spray lashed at them, along with a steady, unrelenting drizzle. Please no, Hyde resumed his pleading, kneeling in the wet earth. Don't make me go there. What happened? Why aren't we at headquarters? James shouted over the roar of the waves. Padfoot had begun growling aggressively at the ocean. It could be a spell stopping a wizard from leaving a certain area, Remus replied, scanning for whatever Padfoot was growling at. Someone must have cast it on Hyde. What's there on the cliff face? A cave, Tonks asked, shielding her eyes from the rain as she examined the wave-battered rocks. That's what it looks like, Remus answered quietly, then turned to Hyde. Is that where you need to go, the cave? Hyde only shook his head, as if trying to block out Remus's voice. What do you have to do there? Take something. Not take, Hyde managed to reply. Return. Tonks exchanged glances with James and Remus. It seemed Hyde was in possession of something that belonged to Voldemort, something very important to him. Return what? Tonks asked. Hyde suddenly clutched his chest and gave her a nasty look, as though she were plotting to steal his most precious possession. All right, you don't have to tell me, she said quickly, before he could do anything dangerous or unpredictable. We can help you. Hyde eyed them suspiciously. Remus caught on to Tonks's train of thought and stepped in to help. You said you're scared. We can protect you. Hyde relented, his fear outweighing that other voice, Voldemort's voice. That was forcing him towards the cave. The journey to the cave was long and grueling, part of it a slippery climb along the cliff face, part of it swimming in the churning waters. Padfoot led the way, scrambling up rocks with ease on all fours, the others following in silence, battered by waves and cruel wind. There was no doubt they were entering a dangerous place, but they knew the Order didn't get a chance to glimpse Voldemort's plans every day. They reached the cave's mouth soaked and exhausted. Remus cast a drying charm on all of them, then James muttered, What in Merlin's name do you think you're doing? Calm down, Prongs. This cave's better hidden than most of the ones I used to hole up in, said Sirius, standing where Padfoot had been moments before. And it's not like Hess going to tell anyone. He jerked his head at Hyde, who was dragging himself towards a set of slippery steps cut into the cave wall, utterly oblivious to what was happening around him. The four of them followed him into another, smaller cave. Hyde cut himself on a sharp stone and pressed his bleeding hand to the wall. Instantly, an oak door appeared where the blood had touched the stone. How did you know to do that? James fired at him, but Hyde either didn't hear or ignored him. Like a man possessed, he passed through the door and vanished from sight. They followed him down a narrow stone corridor, which opened into a third cave, so vast they couldn't see the end of it, with a dark lake at its center. A ghastly, greenish light filled the space, emanating from a lone island in the middle of the water. Hyde was already hauling a battered boat from the water, using a rope trailing along the rocky shore. Moving as if he knew exactly what he was doing, he sat in the boat, and the four of them scrambled aboard before he could set off without them. The crossing to the island probably lasted no more than a few minutes, but to Tonks it felt like hours. The cave was utterly silent apart from the slap of water against the boat's hull, and the water was so black and deep it felt almost unnatural. Don't touch anything, not even the water, Remus warned in a low voice, as if reading Tonks's intention to reach out and discover what was so wrong about it. We've no idea what curses are lying in wait here. They reached the island. Hyde got out of the boat and went to the stone dais in its center, upon which stood an ornate stone basin, the source of the strange light. The four of them gathered around as Hyde clutched the basin with both hands as if his life depended on it, staring into the greenish liquid it contained. Then, in a sudden, jerky motion, he seized a fine silver goblet resting nearby and filled it with the liquid, draining the basin completely. Tonks watched his face as he raised the goblet to his lips with a trembling hand. No, wait. The realization struck her that they were just standing there, letting something dreadful happen. But it was too late. Hyde drained the liquid in 2 long gulps. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the goblet clattered to the stone floor with a deafening ring, and Hyde collapsed, screaming in pain. The four of them closed in, helpless, as he writhed in agony on the ground, crying and screaming. Tonks had never heard a human make such horrific sounds of pain, except perhaps that one full moon night in the ministry. "What can we do?" Sirius shouted. No one had an answer. "Please," Hyde gasped now, eyes staring sightlessly. "Water, please, so thirsty." Without thinking, Tonks snatched up the goblet and dashed to the lake's edge to fill it. "Tonks, no," someone yelled, but it was too late. The goblet's rim touched the water, and a great ripple shuddered across the lake. The surface began to move. A green, rotting head broke the water before Tonks. She jumped back and cursed the creature before it could emerge fully, but he wasn't alone. More and more of them rose from the water, clambering onto the rocky shore, stooped and decaying. Tonks had studied in Ferry at the Aura Academy, but she had never truly believed she'd encounter such abominations in real life. "Tonks, cover the east side," James shouted to her. She saw that the others had already spread out around the small island to drive the Inferi back from all sides. She leapt into position and cursed an Inferius that had managed to scramble onto the bank. "They're afraid of fire," Remus called, surprisingly calm as he drove the Inferi back with bursts of flame. "If we make a ring of fire, we can keep them away. Ready." Tonks barely dodged an Inferius that tried to grab her ankle. She kicked it away and poured all her focus into producing the largest jet of flame she could. Remus's plan worked immediately. The Inferi retreated into the water, their black mouths opening in silent screams. "Nice work, Professor," Sirius said to Remus once it was over. Tonks holstered her wand and hurried to Hyde, who was sprawled at the foot of the basin, motionless. His arm lay slack on the stone before him, something golden glinting on the rock next to his hand. She rolled him over and felt a rush of relief when she saw he was breathing. His eyes were wide open, but they didn't register her. "Hyde," she said, shaking him, but he didn't respond, trapped in a world of his own. "Jackson," it was pointless. "I've seen this before," James said above her. She looked up to see him holding a gold chain with a pendant by the tip of his wand. "Mooney, isn't this one of the pieces you lot took from Grimold Place?" "I've seen it too," Tonks said, recognizing the emeralds set into the ornate necklace. "We confiscated it from the werewolves in that raid. Hyde liked it, so he took it." "There's another one here," Remus said, drawing their attention to an identical necklace lying at the bottom of the basin. "Don't touch it," James warned. "Don't worry, it's not even enchanted. Looks like a fake." "Let me see," Sirius said suddenly, snatching the locket from Remus and examining it closely, trying to open it. With a click, it sprang apart, and a folded scrap of parchment fell out. Tonks, still kneeling beside Hyde, picked it up and read aloud. "Lord Voldemort, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I wanted you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as possible. I welcome my death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will once again be mortal." "What's a Horcrux?" James asked. "Don't look at me," Remus replied, "but I'm sure Dumbledore would know. Let's go." While he was under a sleeping spell, they took Hyde to headquarters and left him in a secluded room under Marley's watch, while they sent for Dumbledore and went to wait in the kitchen. It was still only the afternoon, but they decided they deserved a drink after the day they'd had. They sat in silence around the table, the two lockets and the mysterious note resting in its center. After a few minutes, James said, "Padfoot, you haven't said a word since the cave." Sirius, who had indeed been unusually quiet, took a long sip of his drink. "R.A.B. Those are the initials of Regulus Arcturus Black." "Your brother?" Tonks asked in astonishment. She knew Sirius had had a brother who had been a Death Eater in the First War, but on the few occasions Sirius had spoken about him, he'd made it sound as if he'd been a coward, not someone who would dare cross Voldemort like that. "It could stand for a lot of things, Padfoot," Remus told him gently. "That's not the only thing," Sirius went on. "When we were in the forest, one night I saw him, his ghost of spirit or something, holding the locket in our tent. He was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear him." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd have thought I was losing my mind. Back then, I suspected that I had. But after what happened to Hyde, I've no doubt I really saw Regulus. He stole that locket from Voldemort, and somehow he tried to warn me not to let anyone take it." "Maybe you're right," Remus said suddenly. "I felt like I was going mad in the forest too. Maybe the locket affected us somehow." "You know what this means, don't you?" James said, grinning. "Regulus didn't die trying to run away. He was trying to sabotage Voldemort's plans. He was a hero." Sirius nodded heavily, but there was a spark in his eyes as he drank from his glass. Dumbledore appeared in a burst of green flames from the fireplace. They reported their mission to him in detail, and when Tonks reached the part about the cave, Dumbledore asked her not to leave anything out and to tell him everything she remembered about the place and the curses within it. At last they showed him the lockets, the real one and the fake, and Regulus's note. When the story ended, Dumbledore said nothing. He sat looking down at his hands, folded in his lap for a few moments, and suddenly Tonks realized he was smiling. "Perhaps it's too soon to rejoice," Dumbledore said at last. "I am pleased to know I was right, though it might have been better had I been wrong." He explained, "Even on that very Halloween night, when Voldemort failed to kill Harry, I suspected he had taken steps to make himself impossible to kill. In my youth I was his teacher, though back then he was known as Tom Riddle, and I noticed that from a very early age he was fascinated by and afraid of death, which I believe pushed him towards the dark arts. 10 years later, when it became clear Voldemort had in some form survived that night, I began to investigate. I discovered that there is one kind of magic which can grant a wizard immortality, if such a thing can be called life, by splitting the wizard's soul and hiding the fragments inside inanimate objects, horcruxes. It is a most foul magic, which requires the user to take another person's life. Only by committing this vile act can a wizard split his soul. Not that that ever bothered Voldemort," James said darkly. "To date, I have encountered one horcrux," Dumbledore continued. "It was a diary, which, much like this locket, caused Ginny Weasley to do Voldemort's bidding without even realizing it. Harry destroyed the diary, but I knew Voldemort would certainly have made several horcruxes to protect himself. So far, I know of 4 for certain, including the diary and this locket." "What are the other 2?" Remus asked. "I believe they are a ring belonging to the Gaunt family, Voldemort's mother's family, and Helga Hufflepuff's cup. I believe this locket once belonged to Salazar Slytherin, which is why Voldemort must have gone to great lengths to turn the treasures of the other founders into horcruxes as well. So we need to find them and destroy them," James said, sounding as though he could hardly believe Dumbledore had kept this from him all this time. "That you shall do," Dumbledore said, a gleam in his eye. "You have without doubt proved yourselves in this mission. Our only chance of defeating Voldemort is to find and destroy every Horcrux he has created. However, I must ask you not to tell anyone, inside or outside the Order, what I have told you today. Lily is the sole exception. If Voldemort hears even a rumor that we have uncovered his secret, he will gather his Horcruxes to him, and we will never find them. Let us hope he believes Hyde has completed the task and returned the locket to its hiding place. And what are we going to do with this? Tonks gestured towards the Horcrux, which glittered with a deceptive gleam on the table. Destroy it. Dumbledore rose to his feet. He held out one thin hand, and with the other he passed his wand over it in concentration. A silver sword, set with enormous rubies, appeared in his grasp. The sword of Gryffindor, he told the four of them. Holding the sword, he seemed taller and more imposing than ever, radiating power. It is goblin-made steel. If the books in my possession are correct, it should be able to destroy the Horcrux. Stand back. They pressed themselves to the kitchen walls and watched as Dumbledore raised the sword high, pointed downward, and brought it down in a swift stroke upon the locket. A black light blinded Tonks as the steel met the gold, and a hideous, snake-like face was seared into her vision within the darkness. It was over in a second, leaving her ears ringing. All that remained of the locket were shards of gold. Dumbledore left them with a promise to brief them on their next mission soon. Tonks thought he looked more energized and optimistic than she had ever seen him. James refilled their glasses for the second time. To Regulus Arcturus Black, he said, raising his glass, and to messing up Voldemort's plans. They drank, and Tonks said, "Thanks for not telling Dumbledore I nearly got us all killed in that cave." "The only thing you did there was pity someone who was suffering," Remus told her. "If anything, you should be praised for your kindness." Tonks felt so embarrassed by that remark that she said, "Hufflepuff for the win." Chapter 33, Fire and Ice. Lily shifted nervously on her toes as she was standing in the backyard of a large Muggle home. The owners were on vacation in the Caribbean, so all the blinds were closed and the lights were out. It was odd to think that her old potions professor, Professor Slughorn, was seeking refuge in such a distinctly Muggle place. She had always liked Professor Slughorn, who had been kind to her and encouraged her to pursue her talents. The notion that she was coming to see him with an ulterior motive made her feel slightly guilty and uncomfortable. She walked up to the door and opened it with a simple charm. She might have felt bad for breaking into someone's home if she didn't know the place had already been broken into a few days prior, and that the burglar was still inside the house. "Professor Slughorn," she called, her voice echoing in the vast home. "It's Lily Evans." There was no response. Dumbledore had told her that ever since he got word of Voldemort's return, Slughorn had been on the run, fearing that Death Eaters would pressure him to join their ranks, so he might be suspicious of her at first. She went into the lavish parlor on the ground floor and took a colorful box from her bag, placing it on the coffee table. "I've brought you crystallized pineapples. I know it's your favorite." She sensed a movement in the corner of the room. She took off her coat and sat down on one of the comfy sofas. "Professor Dumbledore told me you went into hiding once you heard of Voldemort's return." Another slight movement. Slughorn was obviously uncomfortable hearing Voldemort's name. "So I thought about something only you and I know, something you confided in me that I swore I would never tell a soul. You told me that when you were young, specifically when you were 24, you loved a Muggle woman. You explained to me that you were never ashamed of it, but you swore not to tell anyone for fear it might hurt the reputation of your family. Being one of the sacred 28, even a rumor about consorting with Muggles could be harmful to the family's status." At that, a large shape disconnected from the wallpaper in the corner of the room. The wallpaper design washed away, leaving behind the shape of a fat, bearded man holding his wand. Professor Slughorn appeared before her, wearing a thick cashmere cardigan. He had always been a good dresser, something that his advanced age hadn't changed. He himself looked almost exactly the same as when Lily had been a student, with his thick white mustache. The only major difference was his belly, which had become bigger over the years. "Dear Lily," he greeted her with sincere warmth, his eyes full of tears. Is that really you? I read in the paper that they say you returned from the dead, but I didn't believe it. It really is me, sir, Lily replied with a smile. She got to her feet as he approached her hesitantly. May I? He asked, and then hugged her. He had only done it once before, the day she graduated from Hogwarts. I was devastated when I heard the news all those years ago, he said as he patted her back, his voice thick with tears. You had such a bright future ahead of you, and to think your life had been cut short so early, so brutally. He pulled back and left the room to make tea. Lily heard him blowing his nose loudly in the kitchen. But when he returned with the tea tray, he was the same old jovial Professor Slughorn. You must tell me everything, he said excitedly as he served the tea. How on earth did you and Mr. Potter survive that night? It's a mystery to us as well, Lily replied and accepted a cup. She knew Slughorn would be curious, as everybody was, but she was not prepared to share the details with him, scarce as they were. We don't remember much from that night. All we know is that for years we believed we were Muggles, lived a normal life, until the night Voldemort returned. Slughorn shifted uncomfortably and took a piece of pineapple. I wish you wouldn't say his name, my dear. Well, I am very glad you are back with us, even though the times have just turned for the worse. They avoided the topic of Voldemort's return and talked about Harry and Emily for a while. Slughorn had great expectations from both of them, being Lily's children, and was especially happy to hear about Emily's affinity for potion making. Seems your son takes after his father in that regard, Slughorn said with some disappointment when Lily told him that Harry wasn't showing any interest in potions. Mr. Potter was a bright student, but he didn't seem to put any special effort into potions. He comes from a family of many successful witches and wizards, but he himself had always been an underachiever. You could have done better for yourself if you wished, if you don't mind me saying so. Lily did mind him saying so, but she kept her composure. She still hadn't gotten from Slughorn the thing she came for. I'm very happy with James, she said to conclude the topic. They talked for a while longer about the children and about Lily's new career as a Hogwarts professor. Then, when she felt Slughorn couldn't possibly be more comfortable around her, she brought up the reason for her visit. Sir, there is something I would like to ask of you. Anything, my dear, Slughorn said without hesitation. I know you used to have a student whose name was Tom Riddle, she said solemnly, and I also know that Tom Riddle grew up to be Voldemort. You don't need to shrink away from his name, sir. He was your student. You know he's only flesh and blood. I don't want anything to do with him, Slughorn said with a shiver, taking a sip from his tea to calm his nerves. Whatever you want, I can't give it to you. I need your memory, she pressed on, from the day you told Tom Riddle about the Horcruxes. Slughorn put down his cup with a trembling hand. Dumbledore put you up to this, didn't he? He asked in accusation. No one put me up to anything, Lily replied, getting a little impatient with the potions master. As long as Voldemort lives, my son will never be safe. I already know he created the Horcruxes to avoid death, and I need all the information I can get to find out what they are and destroy them. Haven't you learned your lesson? Slughorn scolded her. You can't stand up to the Dark Lord. The last time you tried, you were lucky to cheat death. I already told you before, when Potter first dragged you into this futile war. Joining the fight against Voldemort was my choice. Lily cut across him, her anger rising. It was one thing that Slughorn thought he could comment about her choice of a husband. It was a different thing completely that he thought she was nothing more than a senseless girl doing as she was told. And it was the right choice to stand up for what I believe, regardless of the harsh consequences. I'm not content with living in hiding, moving from home to home like a fugitive. I'm prepared to fight for the life I want for me and my children. Slughorn didn't miss the jab about his life on the run. It was obviously a sensitive topic for him. This memory can never fall into the wrong hands, he said at last. I will bring it straight to Dumbledore. It will be safe with him, Lily promised eagerly. She reached into her bag and took out an empty vial. Slughorn complied to her request, uneasily. "I am concerned for your safety, Lily, that's all," he said apologetically, as he returned to her the vial full of silvery mist taken from his temple. "I know, sir," she said as she tucked the vial safely in her bag. "I know better than anyone what Voldemort is capable of." On that bitter note, they said their goodbyes, asking each other to keep safe. Lily hoped their argument wouldn't damage their relationship, but even if it did, it was a price she was willing to pay to keep Harry safe. She apparated to headquarters. The entrance hall was full of boxes of Christmas decorations. Sirius was planning an especially festive holiday, but Sirius himself was nowhere to be seen. Lily levitated the boxes out of the way before Tonks could trip on them. She walked past the covered portrait of Mrs. Black, careful not to wake her up, and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Most of the second floor was taken up by the Black family library, which was locked during the summer in case the children decided to wander inside and discover the many books on dark magic and other questionable fields of magic. Lily approached the locked door, performed a complicated unlocking charm, and entered. Ever since the mission that Tonks led 2 weeks prior, which led to the discovery of the Locket Horcrux, they have used the library as their center of operation for finding and destroying Voldemort's Horcruxes. James liked to refer to them as Team HH, so as not to reveal the nature of their secret mission to the other Order members. When Lily entered, she found that the other four were all there, busy with the many books and maps that filled the room from wall to wall, and were the reason why they placed an advanced locking charm on the door. Another reason for the locking charm was a tall object that stood between the bookshelves, covered in a sheet. It was the large mirror that was located in the corridor at Hogwarts where the girl from Emily's year was attacked. James got permission from Dumbledore to bring it to headquarters for further investigation, but it was less of a priority now that they were in charge of the Horcrux hunt. There was something heartwarming, even nostalgic, in seeing her husband and friends sitting in the library in deep concentration. It was almost like they were at Hogwarts again, preparing for their NEW. T.S. James' hair was sticking out in all directions after he ran his fingers through it in a moment of frustration as he examined a map of the country. Sirius swung dangerously on the back legs of his chair as he flipped through a book. Remus was meticulously writing notes, and Tonks was chewing and blowing bubblegum bubbles as she hovered over a priceless ancient scroll. Tonks fit in so well with their group that sometimes Lily forgot that she actually didn't go to school with them and wasn't with them in the First Order. Sirius had given her the prestigious title of Honorary Marauder. Lily, who for some reason had always had trouble making friends with other women, felt very comfortable around her from the very beginning. She was one of the most empathetic and optimistic people she had ever met. It was no wonder Remus was so smitten with her. He tried to hide it, and maybe even believed he was successful in doing so, but to his friends, his feelings were as clear as day. James and Sirius even made bets among themselves about when something would finally happen between the two. Sirius bet that Tonks was going to make a move sometime during Christmas. James agreed that Tonks would make the first move, but that it would take her at least a few more months to come to her senses. Lily said that it was wrong to make bets on their friend's love life, a comment which they brushed off. "Did you get it?" James asked Lily as she walked into the library. She silently took out the vial with Slughorn's memory and placed it on the table. Who would have thought old Slughorn was involved with Voldemort? Sirius wondered, picking up the vial and examining the silvery fog inside. "You don't choose your students," Remus said as he fished the vial from Sirius' fingers and placed it carefully in a padded box. "I'll write to Dumbledore so we can all look at it together." "I should get back to the school," Lily said as Remus took out a blank piece of parchment and a quill. "Wait, don't you want to see the memory?" James asked her. "It must have been hard to get Slughorn to let go of it. Don't you want to see what's in it?" Lily had hoped to just slip away and avoid that conversation, but the four of them were looking at her with interest and expectation. "I don't want to see it," she said, feeling slightly embarrassed. "I don't want to see Voldemort." No one argued. Lily was sure they thought they understood where she was coming from, but knew that they really didn't. They didn't understand that she couldn't look at the face of evil without remembering vividly the night she died. To her relief, there was a knock on the door at that moment. It was Arthur, and he was looking for her. She went outside to meet him, gathering her composure. "Is everything all right, Arthur?" she asked, seeing that Arthur looked tense. "Well, yes, I think so," he said. "I just came back from the ministry. I've heard a strange rumor, and I thought you should hear it. They've brought your sister in for questioning." It was the last thing Lily had expected to hear. "How can that be? She's a Muggle," she said, bewildered. "It's not unheard of that Muggles are brought into the ministry for questioning. It requires special permission from the Magical Confederation office, and the Muggles' memories of the event are completely wiped afterward, of course. They must think your sister has very valuable information if they went to such lengths to bring her in." Lily felt a pang of panic. Was this about Harry somehow? "Is there a way for me to find out why she was brought in? I'll have to use up some favors, but—" "You shouldn't get involved, Arthur. I would hate to put your job at risk." James slipped out of the library door behind her and immediately noticed Lily looked worried. "What's wrong?" Lily told him about Petunia. Unfazed by the information, James turned to Arthur. "Where is she now?" "I'm not sure. I only know that the Aura office is handling the interview." James raised his brow slightly at this. "Aura's questioning a Muggle seems like an overkill. Thanks, Arthur will handle this. Let's go, Lily." He started downstairs. Lily followed him uncertainly. "What are we going to do?" she asked as he put on his coat. "This interview has to have something to do with us or Harry. If that's the case, we have the right to at least know we're being investigated. Also, I'm pretty sure there are certain rights for Muggles who have wizard relatives regarding ministry business." They went into the freezing winter evening and apparated to the ministry guest entrance. James cleared some snow that was blocking the telephone box door, and they stepped inside. "Impressed with my bureaucratic prowess?" he asked Lily, noticing she was smiling slightly as he punched the password on the phone dial. "I am, but that's not why I'm smiling," Lily said as the box started to descend into the pavement. "When I saw Slughorn today, he told me he thinks you're an underachiever. It's a shame he'll never know what you're capable of." "He said that about me. That old git, he never got over the fact I didn't want to join his silly little club," James said, unbothered. He eyed Lily in the dimness. "Do you agree with him? Would you rather I had some fancy ministry career?" "I can't possibly imagine you being ordered around by anyone, especially someone less clever than you. You wouldn't last a day in the ministry. But maybe if you get bored with the order, you could run for Wisengamot." "Maybe," James said, leaning on the box wall in sincere contemplation. "It would certainly be a way to make a difference." They reached the atrium and walked swiftly towards the golden gates at the far end. As they passed by the fireplaces, a few ministry employees on their way home gave them curious and suspicious looks. Lily ran her hand through a strand of her hair nervously, while James seemed unbothered. "What's the purpose of the visit, Mr. and Mrs. Potter?" the wizard at the security desk asked them as they surrendered their wands for registration. He made an obvious attempt to appear professional and calm, but couldn't completely hide his unease. "Magical law enforcement," James replied without elaborating. Lily expected to get pushback, but it seemed James knew exactly what he needed to say to get them in. The security wizard gave them back their wands, and they entered the ministry. They took the lift to the second floor. When they got out, James seemed to know exactly where to go, navigating the corridors with ease. Lily had never been that comfortable in any government building, Muggle or magical. "Good evening," James said to a startled hit wizard that was on duty in the front office. "We're here about Petunia Dursley." Do you have an appointment?" the wizard stammered, obviously recognizing James. "Of course not. Please let us talk to the person in charge of the investigation." "Ora Dawlish." "Yes, Ora Dawlish. Please call him." Lily was certain this stunt would have never worked for her. But at James' insistence, the wizard got to his feet and hurried into another room. They waited for Ora Dawlish for a very long time. The office they were in obviously didn't have many visitors because there was nowhere to sit. Lily and James had to summon their own chairs, where they sat for almost 2 hours. James got bored quickly and started to wander around the office, which made the hit wizard nervous. Lily was too uneasy to do anything but tap her foot against the floor and bite her nails. She was worried about the fact that Petunia was being interrogated by the ministry, but more than that, she was tense and afraid of the possibility of coming face to face with her sister. From the moment that Lily got her Hogwarts letter, her relationship with Petunia had been on a downward slope. For some reason, Petunia was terrified of magic, and at the same time was fascinated by it. Lily had always secretly suspected that her sister was a little bit jealous of her magical abilities. In their temperaments, Lily and Petunia were like fire and ice. Petunia was a master of passive aggressiveness, a talent she honed over the years. She was mean and cruel without ever saying a bad word or raising her voice. Lily wasn't like that. She would lose her temper, cry, and try to fight the unfair treatment she received from the sister that she had been so close to in childhood. That kind of unchecked emotional outbursts were unacceptable in their household, so she learned to avoid her sister at all costs. She escaped into the wizarding world, where Petunia and their parents weren't allowed. In the wizarding world, she was safe from their expectations and judgments. But now Petunia had invaded that world, not by choice, but still, and Lily was torn between the urge to get up and leave at once, and wanting to burst into the room Petunia was in and spill out all of the anger and resentment she had held inside for years. Finally, when even the hit wizard at the desk started to nod off, Dawlish finally arrived. He was a serious-looking man with short grey hair and walked with an air of self-importance that characterized some auras. "How may I assist you?" he said to Lily and James in a tone that made it clear that the last thing on his mind was assisting them. "You can start by telling us why you're investigating Petunia Dursley," James replied. Lily was especially grateful for him at that moment. The long, stressful wait left her tired and unsure before the capable-looking aura. "There is no investigation into Mrs. Dursley," Dawlish replied easily. James rolled his eyes. "What are you, a genie? Come on, why did you bring her in? You're obligated to tell us if you're investigating us or our children, you know that." The way Dawlish said, his jaw made it clear he knew James was right. He said in an official tone, "The Aura Department is conducting an official investigation into Lily Potter." "What?" Lily was shocked. She had been sure this whole thing was about Harry and didn't even consider the possibility it was about her. The way the aura referred to her, as if she wasn't even there, made the claim even harder to believe. "On what grounds?" James demanded. "On the suspicion of practicing dark magic." "Dark magic," James repeated in sudden anger. Lily was now too shocked to even speak. "How dare you? She gave her life to fight Voldemort." Dawlish didn't flinch, only set his jaw again. "Be that as it may, opposing he who must not be named is no guarantee against the lures of the dark arts. As you must know, Mr. Potter, as you are so versed in the word of the law, the Aura Office has the responsibility and the right to investigate any suspicion of dark magic use." "Who reported her?" James asked, and then went on. "You know what? Don't answer that. We know it was fudge. What proof could you possibly have to even justify opening an investigation?" Dawlish raised his brow slightly. He didn't look fazed in the slightest, and that put Lily on edge. He acted too confident for her liking. "Come hear it for yourself," he said nonchalantly, and turned to the door from which he entered. He led them down a windowless corridor with a high ceiling. On both sides were doors with numbers on them. When they reached room number 7, he opened the door and allowed them to enter first. It was like entering a cinema as a film was showing. The room was completely dark, with no furniture at all except for one chair that stood in the middle of the room, facing the wall opposite to the door. On that wall was a large round window that overlooked a brightly lit room on the other side. Lily felt a strange numbness as she approached the window and looked into the other room. It was decorated in the form of a stylish parlor, equipped with a crystal chandelier and fine oil paintings of aristocratic figures that did not move. On a sofa in the middle of the room sat a blonde woman in her late 30s, wearing heavy makeup and dressed in an unflattering dress that made her look much older than she was. Lily recognized her sister, but there was nothing familiar about her. It was like she was wearing a costume in an attempt to impress someone. She was sipping tea from an expensive-looking china set and looking around the room with an envious glance. A white-painted door on the other side of the window opened, and in stepped Dawlish, suddenly dressed in a tweed suit instead of wizard's robes. Lily didn't even notice that he had left the room where she and James were watching from. "I apologize for keeping you waiting, Mrs. Dursley," Dawlish said with the utmost politeness and took a seat opposite Petunia. "Is there anything more I can get you? More tea? Something to eat?" "Oh, how kind of you." "No, thank you, Mr. Dawlish," Petunia said, matching the aura's politeness with royal-like manners. Her voice set chills down Lily's spine. She thought she had forgotten the sound of it long ago, but now realized she had remembered it well. "There are just a few more facts that I need to corroborate. I'm terribly sorry for asking this of you, but could you please tell me again about your sister's unusual abilities?" "What the hell is he playing at?" Lily heard James mumble by her side. She couldn't take her eyes off the scene before her. Petunia put down her teacup. She seemed distraught and agitated. Lily wondered how much of it was an act and how much was genuine distress. "I assure you that no one will ever know that you were the one to tell me those things, Mrs. Dursley," Dawlish promised her. "Your family and friends need not know that you discussed your sister with me." Petunia nodded. She had always believed blindly in authority. "My sister always had odd things happening around her," she told Dawlish in a thin voice. "It has been that way ever since I can remember. I never gave it much thought. You see, my parents never noticed it, so I assumed it was nothing out of the ordinary until she almost killed all of us." Lily flinched. She felt James looking at her with worry. Petunia took a long sip of tea with a trembling hand. Dawlish waited patiently for her to continue, his hands folded in his lap. "It happened when I was 12, and Lily was 10, just before she got the letter from the chul. One night she was having a nightmare. It wasn't unusual. As a child, she often had those. We shared a room when we were young, so I knew how to recognize what was happening and calm her down. But that time it was different. I remember it vividly. She was thrashing in her bed, crying in her sleep, trembling from head to toe. I went to her and touched her arm to wake her up, and it burned me like I had grabbed a burning coal. I cried out, and she opened her eyes and looked at me, but it was as if it wasn't really her. It was as if there was an actual fire burning inside her eyes. And then Petunia paused to blow her nose on her handkerchief. Lily was breathing fast, heavy breaths. And then the fire started. I don't know how it happened, but suddenly all of the room was burning, the beds, the curtains, the rug. And it spread so fast. By the time we and our parents managed to run outside, it had consumed the whole house. It took everything. We were lucky to escape with our lives. Oh, Mr. Dawlish, it was so terrifying." "It's all right, Mrs. Dursley. You are perfectly safe now." Lily jumped in fright when she felt James' hand touch hers. She realized she was hyperventilating. She heard him saying soothing words to her, but their meaning didn't register. "Is it really true that she's alive?" Petunia asked Dawlish, her nose red. "Yes, it's true. Would you like to see her?" "No," Petunia called in fear. No, I never want to see her or her son ever again. She put me and my family in so much danger when she left him with us. Now we will finally be safe. What are you talking about? James shouted at her through the glass. She couldn't hear him. Do you think we wanted to leave Harry with you? Thank you for sharing your story, Mrs. Dursley, Dawlish said, getting up. Someone will be with you shortly to take you home. He left the room and Petunia stayed behind, wiping her eyes. James banged on the window with his fists, trying to get her attention, to no avail. Every bang sent waves of panic through Lily's body, but she couldn't tell him to stop. She was frozen in place. Dawlish entered the room they were in, wearing his robe again. Let us in there, James demanded of him, pointing to where Petunia was sitting. It's time I gave her a piece of my mind. Mrs. Dursley made it clear that she does not wish to see you, Dawlish said to him calmly. And as she is under the protection of the Ministry of Magic, I must respect her wishes. Oh, now you care about the rules. I do. Take my advice and save your energy, Mr. Potter. Your words will be lost on her anyway. Her memory will be erased the moment she steps out of here. He turned to look at Lily. There was determination, weariness, and a little bit of curiosity in his gaze. She was still reeling from Petunia's tale, and the way he looked at her made her feel like an animal in a cage. Let's go, she managed to breathe to James in a choked voice. Going so soon, Dawlish spoke up with a sudden triumph. After you had been waiting for so long, don't you have anything to say about what we just heard? That was supposed to be your proof of dark magic use, James pushed back when Lily couldn't speak. If uncontrolled child magic outbursts are considered dark magic now, Azkaban would be filled with children under the age of 11. Have you ever burned down a house as a child, Mr. Potter? Dawlish questioned him. I certainly haven't. You must realize that kind of raw power is unusual in a child, and paired with the fact that as an adult, she somehow managed to survive the killing curse. It's not something the Auror office can overlook. You're very good at overlooking things when it serves your purpose, James said in a low voice. Feeling a surge of emotion, Lily gripped his arm forcefully. Let's go, she said again, pleading. This time James listened to her. They left without another word to Dawlish and took the lift back to the guest entrance. The ministry was almost completely empty, but even if it had been full of people, Lily wouldn't have noticed a thing. She felt like she was sleepwalking, not able to wake. They went into the telephone box and returned to the surface. The December night was freezing, with light snow falling. Lily barely noticed that James was leading her into a nearby alley. He summoned a chair and guided her to sit in it. Only then did she realize that her legs were shaking. Don't worry about that investigation, she heard James saying to her in a reassuring voice. If they had any substantial evidence, they wouldn't have had to bring in a Muggle, which, by the way, isn't eligible to testify in front of the Wisengamot. I think their plan was for us to find out they brought in your sister, so we would come and hear this. They're just trying to rattle you. Don't you want to know? Lily asked him. In the cold, dark alley, she was able to take back control of her breathing and calm down. Her previous distress was replaced by an empty, cold sense of despair. Know what? If what Petunia told Dawlish really happened. It doesn't matter, James said at once. There can't possibly be anything dark or unusual about that. If your parents weren't Muggles, they would have put out the fire, and no one would have given it a second thought. Lily shut her eyes tight and shook her head to get rid of the image of the frightened Petunia, telling how she had almost killed their whole family. Lily, what's wrong? James, Dawlish is right. That night our house burned. The way Petunia told it can't begin to describe how terrible it was. That doesn't mean. You're not listening to me, Lily burst, suddenly losing her temper. I had countless accidental magic outbursts as a child. None of them were like that. What was it like? James asked, kneeling in the dirty snow in front of her. I don't remember, Lily said, her voice heavy with tears. And that makes it even worse. I remember having a nightmare that night, but I don't remember what it was about. The next thing I remember is waking up in a burning room and Petunia screaming. We escaped and watched our home burn to the ground, Petunia, and our parents had scars from the burns for years after that. And my mother's health never recovered after inhaling the smoke, but I didn't have a scratch on me. It was extremely hard for her to tell this to James. She had never told anyone about that night before. She had pushed the memory so deep within herself that prying it out was almost painful. "You must have been terrified," James said softly. "I was," Lily admitted. "For months after that happened, I tried to keep myself from sleeping, fearing it would happen again. Petunia wouldn't share a room with me anymore and couldn't even fall asleep without a wet blanket at the foot of her bed." James sighed and held her hand. Lily appreciated his ability to sense when there was nothing more he could say to comfort her. "It's freezing. Let's head home." They apparated back to Grimmauld Place and rejoined their friends in the library. The grim yet familiar atmosphere was comforting to Lily. "Where did you go?" Tonks asked them. She was sitting on one of the tables, facing Sirius and Remus. They seemed to have been in the middle of a heated discussion. "Dumbledore just left. We had to watch the memory without you." "We had something to take care of," James replied easily, not giving away the seriousness of their visit to the ministry. "Was the memory helpful? What did you see?" Dumbledore's suspicion was correct, Remus told them in a grim tone. "It seems that Voldemort had, in fact, made 6 Horcruxes. This means that we have 4 more to destroy, not including Voldemort himself." "At least now we know what we're dealing with," James said. Lily excused herself, saying that she wanted to take a bath. She left the library, assuming their friends were going to question James about her behavior and that he was probably going to tell them about the ministry's investigation. She went to their room, but instead of going to the bathroom, she lay down on the bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. She lost track of how long she lay there, lost in thoughts and worries, when James came in and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. The room was dark, lit only by a dim reflection from a street lamp outside, but James didn't turn on the light. "At some point," he said, "we're going to have a talk with Petunia about Harry." "I know," Lily replied without looking at him, feeling a pang in her chest. "I'm just afraid that if we do it without Harry's consent, he'll feel betrayed by us." "Me too," James said. "It's hard to try to parent him after we've been missing from his life for all these years. But we can't keep avoiding it. We could never move on as a family if we don't close that chapter." "I know," Lily said again, and sighed. "We'll talk with Harry about it over Christmas break." "Sounds good," James said. He lay on the bed beside her and wrapped one arm around her. Only then did she realize how tense she had been. "There's something else," she said as they lay in the dark. "I'm starting to think that whatever happened the night Voldemort came for us, I think that somehow I was responsible for it. Whatever it was, it came from the same place as that fire I started as a child." "That could explain the scorch marks and the explosion," James said pensively. "But shouldn't you have remembered it?" "I don't know," Lily said in distress. "But what else could it be? Dumbledore said that my love for Harry is what saved him. It must have been some sort of accidental magic. But why can't I remember anything?" She choked, starting to hyperventilate again. James hugged her tighter. "It doesn't matter right now," he said in an attempt to calm her. "Right now, we need to focus on finding and destroying the Horcruxes so we can get rid of Voldemort once and for all. Then Harry and Emily will be safe." Chapter 34. The Perfect Gift. For the first time in his life, Harry was about to go home for Christmas. He thought he'd long since given up on the possibility of being excited for the holidays. Of course, he loved Christmas, at least since he'd come to Hogwarts. He loved spending the holidays with Ron and Hermione in the deserted common room and the lavish feasts the house elves made every year. But it wasn't the same as going home to his family. He was almost afraid to look forward to the holidays, as if his excitement would somehow ruin the whole thing but it was hard not to. His parents still hadn't found a house of their own, which meant that Harry would also be spending the holiday with Sirius, the Weasleys, Professor Lupin, and the other members of the Order. But most importantly, it meant he would be spending the holiday with Ginny. He had always assumed that being in love was something that he would never experience. In his mind, it was a very different experience than having a crush. He imagined that being in love required a level of trust and openness that he assumed he would never be able to have with someone. Opening up and exposing his feelings was something he almost never did. But the moment his lips touched Ginny's, he realized he had been wrong. It wasn't only that he was in love with her. He wanted nothing more than to open up to her and let her know exactly how he was feeling. There was only one problem. No one knew they were together yet. After their first kiss outside the common room, Ginny had quietly told him that she had broken up with Michael, but that she still wanted to wait before they went public about their new relationship. It wasn't that she cared what people thought, she said. She just didn't feel like she could handle the whispering and gossip that the scandal would cause. He knew how bad the school gossip could be. He told her he agreed. The last thing he needed was to be back in the center of the school gossip. And anyway, that the only thing he wanted was just to be with her. Ginny blushed deeply and ran her hand through her hair to hide her face a little, smiling almost uncontrollably in a way that was so unlike her. It was only then that Harry realized what he'd said. He couldn't believe how easy it was just to say what he felt. In the first few weeks, the secret relationship wasn't so bad. It was even enjoyable at the start. It really didn't bother him that they had to meet in secret, even if it was just to hold hands. He hated people looking at him and whispering. Besides, he still hadn't decided how he would tell Ron he was going out with his sister. He liked the idea that he and Ginny were sharing a secret that was just theirs, and there was something especially exciting about sneaking around and snogging in secret locations. He didn't even feel a little guilty that they lied to Angelina, that they needed permission to use the Quidditch pitch for 2 hours after every team practice, so Ginny could work on her seeker skills. In fact, Ginny needed very little of that, except for the fact that they won the game against Slytherin at the start of November, after which Harry and George got a week's worth of detention for getting in a fight with Malfoy. Ginny was an extraordinary flyer and Quidditch player who needed very little practice to stay in shape. They only made that excuse so they could snog in the Gryffindor changing room. But by the time December came, the secret was starting to weigh on him. It was especially hard to keep lying to Ron and Hermione, but the main thing that bothered him was the swarm of boys who seemed to follow Ginny everywhere in the school. Even Dean Thomas had plucked up the courage and asked her to go to Hogsmeade with him in the upcoming visit. Harry had to wait until defense against the dark arts class that day to curse him with a particularly painful hex, which he failed to block. Yes, maybe it bothered him that everyone thought Ginny was single and that anyone could just go up to her and ask her out. Maybe it bothered him that they couldn't go to Hogsmeade together and hold hands in Main Street like all of the other couples. Harry knew, or maybe wanted to believe, that Ginny wouldn't fall for any of them, that they were just a nuisance to her and not a threat to his place in her life. But every time one of them so much as looked at her, he felt an overwhelming urge to make them regret the day they were born. Luckily for Dean Thomas and the rest of them, Harry had more important things to think about. Christmas was fast approaching, and he had no idea what to get his parents or Ginny. He felt like she wouldn't be thrilled with some sparkly jewelry, but he had no idea what other gifts girls liked. He had no choice. He had to ask Hermione for help. "I had a feeling you'd come for help," was Hermione's response when he confided in her in a quiet corner of the common room while Ron was on perfect duty. "But I hoped you'd come to me sooner. The shops are very busy before the holiday. It's a good thing we have the Hogsmeade outing this weekend." "Wait, you already knew about me and Ginny?" "Obviously," Hermione replied, barely looking up from the parchment on which she was scribbling her herbology homework. "You two are so transparent, especially you." Don't worry, Ron doesn't suspect a thing. Really surprising, isn't it? But you might want to start being more careful around the twins. Thanks, Harry said, glad that Hermione supported his relationship with Ginny. So what kind of gift were you thinking of? I don't know. I want it to be something special, but not too fancy. Something that says, let's stop sneaking around and tell the whole world we're together. Are you inside my head? Harry really began to suspect that Hermione could read his mind sometimes. Hermione looked up from her essay and smiled at him. Oh, please, you're an open book. Luckily for you, I've already thought of the perfect gift. That Sunday was a bleak winter day. It had snowed during the night, and the white carpet that covered the streets of Hogsmeade was trampled by the many students that strolled up and down the alleys, busy with their holiday shopping. Hermione introduced Harry to a small and dingy tinkerer's shop in one of the smaller alleys, which was overlooked by most of the other students. Ron, could you please go get me a few quills and a dozen rolls of parchment from the stationery shop? Hermione asked Ron, already shoving some wizarding money in his palm. What's the rush? Ron asked in confusion. We can go together after Harry gets presents for his parents. I want to save time so we could go to the Three Broomsticks early, Hermione explained, unfazed. I heard they're serving homemade holiday edition butterbeer, and I want us to get there before it runs out. That explanation satisfied Ron. He went to the stationery shop without any more objections, while Harry and Hermione stepped into the tinkerer's shop. Did you make up the thing about the holiday edition butterbeer? Harry asked when they were out of earshot, inside the musty and overpacked shop. Of course not, Hermione said at once. It would be cruel to lie to Ron about something like that. They placed the order with the tinkerer, which was an absent-minded-looking gnome with wild white hair. Hermione described to him exactly what she wanted him to make, to the last detail, and he confirmed it wouldn't be a problem. He even said he'd add a color-changing Christmas card for free, and pushed the bright paper toward Harry to sign it while he put down the order. Harry, Hermione said, as she watched him sign the card, you should consider writing something else. Why? Harry asked, baffled. He looked at the card, not understanding what was wrong with it. Love, Harry, Hermione stressed, pointing at his signature. It's a little bit early in your relationship to say words like that. Harry felt his face heating up. Thankfully, the gnome seemed to still be busy with the order. What's wrong with that? It's true, I do love her. I don't doubt that, Hermione said, in that tone she would use when she tried to explain to him something he struggled to understand. And I think it's good that you're honest about your feelings. There are some other boys who could benefit from being a little more in touch with their emotions. But I think that telling Ginny you love her that early in your relationship might make her uncomfortable. I think you should wait a bit. And when you do decide to tell her, you should do it face to face, not on a Christmas card. Harry knew Hermione was right. He was very certain about his feelings for Ginny, but he didn't know if she felt the same. He knew she liked him, but he wasn't at all sure she would be comfortable with words like love. He didn't want to scare her away. He fixed the card and paid the tinkerer. Then he and Hermione walked back to the busy main street. They met Ron just as he exited the stationery shop, holding Hermione's new quills between his teeth, as his arms were leaden with fresh parchment rolls. Thank you, Ron, you're such a help, Hermione said, and gave him a hug. He turned bright red, and thankfully was spared the need to reply, as his mouth was full of quills. As Hermione vanished the parchment and quills, someone on the street bumped into Harry hard, and he felt a gloved hand brush against his. Oh, sorry, Harry, didn't see you there, Ginny said cheerfully. She was wearing a colorful knitted scarf and a matching wool cap, under which her bright red hair flowed down her shoulders. She was accompanied by Luna, who wore a pink wool hat with flaps. It's all right, Harry replied, a smile playing on his face. It's packed here. You better keep close so you won't get trampled. How very considerate of you to suggest that, Ginny replied playfully, and actually moved a little closer to him. What are you lot up to? Harry felt a strong urge to find some excuse to go somewhere alone with her. But before he could come up with one, Hermione said, We're on our way to the Three Broomsticks. Want to join us? Sure, what do you say, Luna? Don't you have anything better to do? Ron interjected. Don't be a prat, Ginny said to him. It was exactly what Harry was about to say to him, word for word. Harry and Hermione are my friends too, you know. Ron mumbled something that sounded like, fine, and they all started towards the Three Broomsticks together. The inn was crowded, full of Hogwarts students and the usual colorful patrons. They settled in at a corner table, and Harry treated everyone to a round of hot butter beer. He was feeling especially cheerful and generous as he was sitting on the bench next to Ginny, so close that their knees were touching. The night before they went home for the holiday, Harry barely slept. Disturbing dreams came back to haunt him that night. He would have much rather the dreams of Ginny kept him awake, rather than these fragments of unease and confusion that pursued him. The carriages hitched to the Vistrals waited for the students outside the front door, the fearsome creatures treading softly in the snow. Now that he knew what they were, and why only he could see them, they no longer seemed frightening at all, but comforting. A slight commotion down the line of carriages caught Harry and his friend's attention. Emily and her friends were about to get into one of the carriages when a few seventh-year Slytherin students rudely pushed past them and took the carriage for themselves. At another time in his life, Harry might have gone to confront these bullies, but instead he waved to Emily and gestured for her to join their carriage. All the other carriages around them were already taken, and the girls looked relieved not to have to split up. It was crowded in the carriage, which was meant for 6 people and now held 8. Ron, Hermione, and Luna were squeezed onto one bench with Jenna, while Ginny, Harry, Emily, and Margaret huddled together on the other. But Harry had no complaints. He and Ginny had to sit very close to make room for the 2 girls. As they settled for the ride, Emily smiled at him gratefully. He smiled back at her, hoping she understood he was sorry for how he'd treated her since Bridget's first attack. The truth was, he didn't even remember why he had been so angry with her in the first place, especially when she was only trying to tell the truth. He still didn't know what had happened that night, but he knew he shouldn't have let Voldemort's tricks drive a wedge between him and the people he loved. When they boarded the train, Emily and her friends went to find a compartment of their own, while Ron and Hermione made their way to the prefect's compartment, promising to come find them as soon as they could get away. Harry was left with Ginny and Luna, who were tasked with looking after Crookshanks and Pigwidgeon. Shall we go find a compartment? Ginny asked. Harry agreed, secretly hoping that Luna would find a reason to leave them alone. Ever since she was attacked in the forest, Ginny had become fiercely protective of her, making sure to be in her company every moment she wasn't surrounded by other Ravenclaw students. Harry admired Ginny for her friendship, and yet secretly wished she would stop being such a good friend and start spending a bit more time with him instead. They found a compartment at the end of the train and settled in. Crookshanks leapt from his basket, stretched, and immediately lay down contentedly in Ginny's lap. Luna took the latest copy of the Quibbler and quickly disappeared behind it. The paper had started to gain momentum since the story of how the Ministry of Magic had sent a hit wizard after the editor's daughter had spread throughout the country. Despite the obvious attempts by the ministry to convince the public, it's just another of the Quibbler's odd tales. Looks like it's just you and me, Potter, Ginny teased Harry, pulling a worn, battered pack of exploding snap cards from her rucksack. They played nearly 10 rounds, until Ron and Hermione returned from their prefect patrol. Harry had attempted more than once to get closer to Ginny while Luna was absorbed in her reading, but every time he tried, Hermione's cat would hiss menacingly and bare its claws, warning him not to come any closer. Ginny found it amusing, but Harry was quite annoyed. They spent the next hour eating sweets with Ron and talking about Quidditch, while Hermione was engrossed in a thick book. At noon, A heavy tiredness came over Harry, and he fell asleep with his head leaning against the window, the winter sun illuminating his face. Lately, he felt like no amount of sleep could drive away the fatigue that kept overwhelming him. It felt as if even when he was asleep, he was somehow awake, in another place, and doing other things. He woke up as the train began to slow down. It was pitch dark outside, apart from the distant flicker of city light that barely filtered through the falling snow. The five of them got off the train together onto the cold, windswept platform, but immediately had to split up. Hermione spotted her parents waiting nearby and said a hurried goodbye to everyone before going to meet them. They were planning to leave for their skiing holiday in the Alps that very night, and Luna wanted to take Ginny to meet her father. Harry and Ron skipped the pleasure of meeting Mr. Lovegood and went to look for their own families. They found Mrs. Weasley, Harry's parents, and Emily at the far end of the platform. Mr. Weasley's absence was noticeable. "Your dad's still at the ministry," Mrs. Weasley told Ron after giving him a tight hug. "The atmosphere there has been quite tense since that Umbridge woman was banished from the school." Harry's mother gave him a long, loving hug, even though they had seen each other nearly every day during the last term. His father just clapped him on the shoulder sympathetically and commented on how much taller he had grown in the last few months. Standing next to his father, he realized he really had grown. Now the gap between them wasn't as big, with only a few inches between them. Harry smiled at him awkwardly, just glad his father had learned he didn't like it when he tried to hug him. "You should get back. It's not good to stand outside in this cold," Mrs. Weasley told the Potters. "We'll get Ginny and follow you." The snow really had started to get heavier, piling up on their coats and hats. "Take care," Lily said, and the two families split up. The Potters went through the barrier back into the Muggle world, managing not to stand out among the people hunched in their coats against the cold. "That man is looking at us," Harry whispered to his mother as he noticed a man in a Muggle attire looking at them from the newspaper stand. "He's an aura," his mother told him calmly. "They're still investigating me, it seems. Your dad says they're just trying to intimidate us. There's nothing to worry about." As they left the station, Harry's father made Emily go into a fit of laughter when he tried to lift her and put her in a luggage cart. Harry suddenly thought about how Uncle Vernon would be waiting impatiently in the car, honking rudely and rushing him so he could get back to his normal life. For the first time, Harry truly grasped the fact that if he chose, he would never have to see the Dursleys again. This realization filled him with boundless hope. It was too cold to walk to Grimmauld Place, so they took a taxi. Harry couldn't remember if he had ever been in a taxi before. His father seemed particularly at ease as he made small talk with the Muggle driver, while in the back, his mother was silently casting a spell to prevent them from being followed. They arrived at their destination after a short ride. Unlike the city streets decorated for the holidays, Grimmauld Place was still the dark and depressing street it had been in the summer. As soon as the taxi was out of sight, they climbed the cracked stone steps to the door decorated with a serpent-shaped handle. Harry's mother made a complex movement with her wand, and the door opened with a clean sequence of clicks. They were greeted by a space that was brightly lit and even quite pleasant. The ugly wallpaper was gone from the entrance hall, replaced by a fresh coat of light cream paint. The portraits of the Black family ancestors were still there, but at least now their blackened frames were a little cleaner and shinier. In Harry's opinion, the most refreshing change was the absence of the candle holders and the snake-like handles that had previously decorated every corner of the house. "Why don't you put your trunks in your rooms and meet us in the kitchen? Everyone is dying to see you," Lily said. Harry and Emily carried their belongings up the stairs, which were now covered in polished wood instead of the dusty carpet that had been there before. They stopped for a moment to admire the house elf heads, which now wore sparkly Santa hats and beards, and then continued to their rooms. Harry and Ron's room hadn't changed much since the summer, apart from the new paint and the grime that someone had finally managed to get off the window. The empty portrait still hung on the wall above Harry's bed. He took the cover off Hedwig's cage and went to open the clasp to let her stretch her wings, but the moment he touched the bars, Hedwig pecked his finger violently. Harry hissed and pulled his hand back. A drop of blood welled up on his skin. With uncharacteristic agitation, Hedwig struggled with the half-open clasp until it gave way, and she immediately flew to the top of the wardrobe. Unbridled rage surged in Harry's heart as he sucked his wounded finger, a rage so strong it was almost paralyzing. It felt as if someone had turned off the light inside his head, leaving him helpless and confused in the darkness. He snapped back to reality with a start as Ron burst into the room with his belongings, Pigwidgeon chirping excitedly in his cage. The darkness in his head disappeared as if it had never been there. "Come downstairs. Mum wants us to help with dinner," Ron announced, already on his way out again. "I'll be right there." "Hurry up, I'm starving." Harry lingered in the room for a moment, giving a last look at the angry Hedwig on top of the wardrobe, and finally followed his friend. On his way down, he peeked into the girls' room, hoping to steal a quick moment with Ginny before they were surrounded by people again. She was there, alone. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him. Ginny was startled, but as soon as she saw it was him, she smiled. He closed the distance between them in a few long strides and kissed her. It didn't matter that they had done this dozens of times by now. It was never enough for him. Her taste and the perfect scent of flowers that always wafted from her were addictive. They only broke apart when a loud noise was heard outside the room. Fred and George were going down to dinner in a commotion. "We need to be careful," Ginny said, pushing him towards the door. "4 of my brothers will be here this holiday. This isn't the time for them to find out about us." "I'm not scared of them," Harry argued as they left the room and went down to the kitchen. "I can take them on." Ginny rolled her eyes and elbowed him in the ribs. He lightly nudged her back, just for the chance to be a little closer to her. The kitchen was bustling. Harry noticed Sirius talking to his father and Professor Lupin by the fireplace, while Ginny went to hug Tonks. Sirius seemed delighted to see him, and Professor Lupin gave him a wide smile and a squeeze on the shoulder. "Sorry I haven't written," Harry said to Sirius, aware that they had barely spoken this term, apart from their conversation through Hagrid's fireplace. "It's all right. I'm sure you have better things to do than write to your old godfather," Sirius replied kindly. "Besides, I've been quite busy myself lately." "Let me guess. It's order business, so you can't tell me anything." "Nice. You're starting to get the hang of it." "You have to at least tell me something," he pleaded with the 3 of them. "The prophet didn't say anything about what happened to that aura that went rogue. Is he still at large?" His father exchanged a look with his friends before replying, "I guess there's no harm in telling you we caught him. Don't worry, he won't be attacking any more people anytime soon, or doing anything else. For that matter, he's been committed to St. Mongus in a catatonic state. Not that you would hear about it from the prophet." "You caught him, not the ministry?" Harry asked in surprise. "What happened to him? Where did you find him?" "That's not for you to know," his father said, just as Bill prevented a major disaster by managing to catch the pile of plates Tonks almost dropped. "Let's go help them." Harry reluctantly let him lead him away from the fireplace. Only after they had moved away a little did his father quietly say, "Don't ask me about it. I'm not going to tell you. But you should know that we found out something about Voldemort, something that might tip the scales." "What is it?" "I told you not to ask. I'm only telling you this because I want you to know everything is going to be all right." Harry nodded and asked no more, even though an intense curiosity still burned within him. They spent the days until Christmas decorating the house and the huge fir tree that was placed in the center of the drawing room. Sirius had insisted on it, as well as on the entire house being decorated for the holidays, including their rooms. He even charmed the drawing room ceiling to constantly rain down clean, warm snow, but had to stop it after Mrs. Weasley complained about the mess. Harry couldn't blame his godfather for wanting to heighten the holiday spirit, since they couldn't leave the house to enjoy decorations or play in the snow. In any case, it didn't bother Harry. Everything he ever wanted was right there. The only room they skipped during the decorations was the bedroom across Sirius's room. No one thought to go in there. A silent agreement had reigned in the house since the summer that no one should enter that room. But for some reason, Harry felt comfortable using it to be alone with Ginny. "Are you sure this won't bother Sirius?" Ginny whispered as they stood in front of the door that had a sign. "Entry is forbidden without the express permission of Regulus Arcturus Black." "I'm sure," Harry said confidently, "unless you'd rather go back to the attic." "No, thanks," Ginny scoffed and went into the room. The space was much more pleasant than they had expected. It was a spacious bedroom, with a magnificent four-poster bed in the center, polished and carved in the shape of twisting snakes. There was a clear feeling that no one had visited the room for a very long time, and yet it was spotless, the bed made perfectly, and embers whispered in the fireplace, as if waiting for someone to return. "I didn't expect this," Ginny admitted, while Harry sprawled comfortably on the huge bed. "Do you think Creature cleans in here?" "He probably does. He worshipped Sirius's brother," Harry said. "Sirius has a brother." Ginny was intrigued, examining the writing desk and the bookcase. There were no pictures or souvenirs in the room, apart from a single golden Quidditch cup. "He did," Harry replied. He felt incredibly at ease in this room, almost as if it were his own room or that of a close friend. "He was a Death Eater. They say he tried to defect, so they killed him." "How do you know that?" "Sirius told me," Harry said immediately, even though he wasn't sure that was correct. The truth was, he didn't remember Sirius ever telling him anything like that. But someone must have told him at some point. How else could he know about it? It was Christmas Eve, and they spent the drowsy afternoon hours in Regulus Black's room, snogging and talking until the winter light began to fade in the windows. "What do you think is going to happen?" Ginny wondered after they had fallen into a prolonged silence. She lifted her head, which had been resting on his shoulder, and leaned on her hand to look at his face in the dim light. "With what?" "With you-know-who. I mean, with Voldemort. What do you think he's planning?" "I don't know," Harry replied, glad he had taken his glasses off and had an excuse not to look her straight in the eye. "But I know he's not going to leave me alone." "Why?" Ginny asked. "Dumbledore said that after what happened in the summer you can't hurt him anymore. What else does he think you can do to him?" "I don't know," Harry said again. He didn't know why, but if he knew one thing for certain it was this, that Voldemort was still lurking somewhere, waiting for him. A heavy feeling of dread, which had already become familiar to him during the summer, settled over him now. As long as Voldemort was alive out there somewhere, and Harry was starting to think he always would be, he would never stop pursuing him. "Are you all right?" Ginny asked after he had fallen silent. "Yeah," he lied. How could she not understand what danger she was in just by being close to him? "They'll probably start preparing dinner soon. We should go down." "Right," Ginny said, giving him one last kiss. "I'll see you downstairs." She left Harry alone in the darkness. He sank onto the bed again and buried his face in his hands. "Nasty kiddykins, doing what they like in my mistress's house. Filthifying Master Regulus's room, shame, shame." Harry wasn't even startled, nor was he surprised that Creature was lurking somewhere in the darkness. "Don't start with me, Creature," he said aloud, getting up from the bed. To his surprise, Creature seemed intimidated by his reaction. His bloodshot eyes gleamed from behind the bookcase, tense and fearful. "It is true what the Masterkins whisper," he cackled in awe. "Shut up," Harry told him, and without even meaning to, he added, "What really happened to Regulus?" If Creature had been afraid before, now he was terrified. "Creature doesn't know what Master is talking about. Creature only cleans." "Whatever," Harry muttered and left. He forgot about the conversation completely before he was even out the door. He went down to the kitchen. The brightly lit staircase, decorated with countless glittering garlands, drew him out of the dark mood that had settled on him in Regulus's room. He felt detached, as if it was all just a very realistic dream. He reached the second floor just as his mother came out of one of the rooms, which as far as he could remember was the library. He caught a glimpse of something bright and silvery before she closed the door and made a small but complex movement with her wand over the door's lock. "Why are you locking the door?" Harry asked her. His parents and Professor Lupin had been secluded in this room for many hours, while the children and Sirius decorated the house with Tonks's help, claiming they were working on a top-secret order project. In their nightly conversations, Harry and Ron had concluded that it must have something to do with what Harry's father had told him on the first night of the holiday. "So that you and other busybodies can't get in," she replied affectionately, and they continued on their way to dinner together. Later that evening, as Harry was alone in his room, Ginny slipped in, a mischievous and slightly shy glint in her eyes. "I wanted to give you your present personally." She revealed a small box she had been hiding behind her back. "You didn't have to get me anything," Harry said. He knew the Weasleys didn't have much money. "I didn't exactly buy it. Open it." Harry took the box, which was light as a feather and wrapped in faded floral paper. Inside the box lay a folded white handkerchief, its edges embroidered with golden snitches and red dragons. "You made this. It's amazing," Harry marveled, running his thumb over the embroidery. He couldn't imagine the energetic Ginny sitting and toiling with a needle, which made the gift even more impressive and touching. Ginny blushed. "My mum taught me. I was never very good at it." "I love it. Thank you," he said, putting the handkerchief in his pocket, deciding at that moment that he would always carry it with him. "Now it's your turn." Ginny sat on his bed while he rummaged through his trunk, looking for the gift he had found her with Hermione's help. "Why is it so heavy?" she asked suspiciously when he gave her the gift, which was significantly larger and wrapped in golden paper. Without waiting for an answer, she tore off the wrapping and took a glass bowl the size of a fist out of the box. Inside it stood a small, colorful model of the burrow, including the wide garden, the pond, and even the chicken coop. Eternal snow fell lightly on the miniature Weasley home, where all the windows were alight with a warm, flickering glow. "I thought you must miss the burrow," Harry said, as she looked at the small house with misty eyes. "I really do miss home," she admitted and hugged him. "Thank you, it's beautiful." They shared a short kiss, then Harry felt the need to confess. "The truth is, it was Hermione's idea." "I should have known," Ginny replied, but didn't seem disappointed. "Did you tell her about us, or did she already know?" "I think she knew before we did." Ginny laughed. "I should go before Ron comes back." She gave him one last kiss. "Merry Christmas, Harry." "Merry Christmas," Harry replied, his body filled with a wonderful warmth. He watched Ginny leave, lost in thought, when he thought he heard a chuckle behind him. He spun around sharply, but there was nothing there but the empty frame. He looked at it suspiciously for a moment, but soon his mind wandered. He lay down on the bed in his clothes, absent-mindedly stroking the embroidered handkerchief. Chapter 35, 12th Night. On the night before Christmas, Harry dreamt he was awoken in the dead of night. He knew he was dreaming because the person who was standing over his bed was himself, gesturing for him to follow. Harry got out of bed and followed his double, gliding along the dark and empty corridors of Grimmauld Place. They stopped in front of the library door on the second floor. Harry's dream double gave him a knowing, almost malicious grin as he was holding his wand over the door lock. He performed that same complex spell his mother performed earlier, that which Harry himself hadn't been able to catch. The door opened silently at his command. "We will achieve great things together, Harry." The room was dark, tall bookshelves stacked with books looming like trees in a gloomy forest. Harry's guide led him past the first shelf, where a large object covered with a sheet stood. The edge of a silver frame glittered in the faint, dusty light that filtered through a narrow window. Harry approached the object, and without thinking pulled the sheet down, revealing a large mirror in a silver frame. Harry woke up dazzled, swaying on his feet. He wasn't in his bed. He was standing in the exact spot he had been in his dream, barefoot and without his glasses, in front of the mirror. All the candles in the library were now lit, and his parents were standing there in their pajamas, looking confused and worried. "What happened?" he asked in confusion, reality and dream colliding in his head. His scar hurt badly. "That's what we were going to ask you," his father said. With a flick of his wand, he put the sheet back in its place over the mirror. "How did you get in here?" "I don't know," Harry replied absently, looking at the now covered mirror. "I dreamt I came here, or rather, that I led myself here." For the first time he noticed that on both sides of the mirror stood tables piled high with books, but without his glasses he couldn't read their titles. "Let's get you back to bed," Lily said, and gently guided Harry towards the door. He had a feeling his parents were exchanging looks behind his back. Only then did he begin to realize that he had once again found himself in a strange situation that he couldn't explain. Maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe I'm just going mad. "You're not going mad," his mother said immediately. "It's clear that some sort of magic is involved here. Try to go back to sleep. We'll talk to Dumbledore." If Harry hadn't been so tired and confused, he would have tried to convince them to take him to talk to Dumbledore himself. But he had a feeling that, as always, the three of them would do everything to keep him in the dark. "The good news is that it seems you really were just sleepwalking," his mother told him in the drawing room before breakfast the next morning. His parents looked like they hadn't slept at all, and Harry was in no better shape. The thought that his doppelganger would visit him again in his dream frightened and intrigued him. "It turns out that the portrait in your room belongs to one of the former headmasters of Hogwarts, Phineas Nigellus Black. He saw you get up and leave the room. There was no one else there. Dumbledore can't stand to see me so much that he sent a portrait to watch over me instead," Harry said bitterly. For some reason it didn't surprise him that Dumbledore was secretly spying and snooping on him. "And what's the bad news?" "There is no bad news," his mother was quick to reassure him. "I'm just going to cast a few charms on you to check if you've been cursed or something similar." He sat quietly while his mother stood behind him and muttered incantations. It was over quicker than he had expected, and he didn't feel any different. "Everything looks fine," Lily said finally. "You're as healthy as can be. Why don't you go have breakfast?" Harry left without arguing, but as soon as he was out of the drawing room, he quietly doubled back to hear what his parents were saying when they thought he couldn't hear. "I don't like this, Lily," Harry's father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until now, was speaking. "How did he manage to open the door? Something's happening, I just know it." It was Christmas Day, and with all the festivities and high spirits in the house, Harry was able to almost forget what had happened at night. The rest of the day passed without any strange events. He didn't tell Ron or Ginny what had happened, and it seemed his parents thankfully chose not to tell anyone else either. He didn't want to sit and theorize with Ron about the meaning of the event, or what that mirror was. He wanted to continue pretending he was just a regular teenager spending the holiday with his family and friends. That evening, they had a delicious and joyful holiday dinner, to which Mrs. Weasley had also invited Mad-Eye Moody and Mundungus, after which everyone moved to the drawing room. The Black family drawing room had never looked so cheerful, decorated with colorful wreaths that covered every possible surface and glittering lights that drove off any shadows that lingered among the old furniture. The centerpiece was an enormous Christmas tree that was Sirius's pride and joy. The huge pine was placed directly in front of the Black family tapestry, obscuring it completely, and was so heavily decorated that it might have buckled under the weight. Fred and George passed around homemade Christmas crackers, decorated with the letters WWW in bright purple. When no one agreed to use them, the twins pulled at a few together as a gesture of good faith, revealing completely innocent complimentary marquans and paper hats with the same mysterious WWW brand. After that, everyone agreed the crackers were indeed innocent, until one burst in Mundingus's face in an explosion of colorful glitter. They spent the evening sitting around the fire, playing charades and listening to tales of the marauders' adventures. Later, as the children played exploding snap on the rug and the adults sipped mulled wine, someone charmed a mistletoe to float around and hover over potential couples. Lily blushed deeply when James gave her a long kiss, and Harry was worried he was giving himself away with the same blush when the mistletoe stopped over him and Ginny. For a fleeting moment, he considered actually giving her a kiss in front of everybody. But the moment passed when Emily, who was sitting on his other side, gave him a sloppy kiss on the cheek and made everyone laugh. The mistletoe entertainment didn't last long after that. After Harry and Ginny, it floated towards where Lupin was chatting with Tonks. She giggled in embarrassment as he tried to swat it away a few times, but it kept coming back, more intrusively each time, until he finally vaporized it with a wave of his wand. It turned into red and green glitter that fell over the pair, and was so hard to remove that they both spent the rest of the night with glitter in their hair. At midnight, Ron and the twins convinced Mrs. Weasley to let them hold a controlled fireworks display, during which fireworks of various shapes and colors exploded near the drawing room, sealing to the delight of the household members and guests. After that, they all went to bed. As he lay down to sleep, his mind full of fond memories from his first Christmas with his family, Harry didn't think about anything ominous, even in passing. But this grace didn't last long, because that was the night the visions began. Like on the first night, he woke up from his sleep in the middle of the night, but this time he was sure he wasn't dreaming. He wasn't in his bed, but sitting on a cold stone throne in a dark hall. Something cool and slimy slithered onto him. It was a huge snake, its scales glistening with a silver sheen in the light of the few candles that floated around the throne. He stroked the creature, feeling no fear. His hands were thin and white as a skeleton's, his fingers long and slender with sharp-looking grey nails at the ends. "Shall we begin, Nagini?" he said in Parseltongue. Nagini hissed in agreement. He took his wand, the wand with the phoenix feather core, and with a slick, practiced movement summoned a bound person from the darkness. It was a young woman, hanging upside down in the air. By her clothes, he knew she was a Muggle. Her bloodshot eyes filled with terror when she saw him in the candlelight. She tried to scream, but enchanted ropes blocked her mouth. He knew what was about to happen. He raised his wand. His hands moved on their own and pointed it at the woman. Avada Kedavra. Harry woke up in terror to see Ron leaning over him worriedly. He realized he was lying in his bed, soaked in sweat, his stomach churning and his scar burning with intense pain. The memory of what he had witnessed in his dream was clear and sharp, and did not fade from his memory like a regular nightmare the moment he woke up. The chill that had seized him when he cast the killing curse was still there in his bones, foreign and frightening. He must have screamed in his sleep, because movements were heard outside the room. After a few moments, Harry's parents appeared. Harry, who hadn't even finished convincing Ron he was all right, wished that they would just leave him alone. "What happened? Did you have another dream?" his mother asked worriedly, sitting on the edge of his bed to examine him closely. "It wasn't a dream," Harry replied with a hint of irritation, pushing his damp hair off his face. "It was real. I saw Voldemort. He killed someone, a Muggle woman." His voice broke. He stopped himself before telling them that he hadn't just seen Voldemort, but that he had been Voldemort. That he had killed that woman. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" his father asked with a hint of doubt. "I'm sure," Harry raised his voice. His throat hurt. "Last night I knew I was dreaming, even during the dream. This time it was different." "We'll talk to Dumbledore," his mother gave him the usual answer. "I have a feeling he already knows," Harry said sourly, gesturing to the empty frame. His mother gave him a look of almost helpless pity. In any case, I'll brew you a dreamless sleep potion for tomorrow night. Try to go back to sleep. We'll talk in the morning. What happened last night? Ron asked after his parents had left, making him promise to call them if anything else happened. Harry told him and then said, I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. This is my first proper holiday. I didn't want to ruin it with more of my weirdness. I get it, Ron said, going back to his bed. But what do you think that mirror does? Maybe it's like the mirror of Erist. I don't think so, Harry said, lying in bed and looking at the ceiling. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, not with the grip of death still tight around heart. I think I've seen that mirror somewhere at Hogwarts. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling he needed that mirror for something important. According to Harry's parents, Dumbledore had no more words of wisdom to share with him, and as always he was instructed to sit quietly and do nothing while Voldemort murdered people. And if that wasn't bad enough that everyone in the house had already heard what had happened and started treating him as if he was going to break at any moment, Ginny also knew. And if there was anyone he wasn't willing to accept pity from, it was her. The next night he took the dreamless sleep potion. A drowsy feeling of peace immediately came over him, and a second before he fell asleep, he felt so relaxed that he thought it might actually work. But the moment sleep swept him away, he was once again on the stone throne in the dark hall, and he knew what was about to happen. This time it was a man in his 40s, trembling in the grip of the enchanted ropes and sweat glistening on his bald head in the candlelight. Please, I have a family, the Muggle pleaded. Harry laughed, a cold and horrible laugh, and aimed the killing curse at him. In a flash of green light, he woke up in his bed. In the vision, he tried to scream, to tell Voldemort, to tell himself, to stop. In the vision, his voice was not heard, but in his room at Grimmauld Place, he must have screamed for long minutes, because when he woke up his parents and also Ginny were there. He sat up immediately, pushing his mother's hand away angrily. The potion didn't help, she asked in a faint voice, already knowing the answer. I told you, it's not a dream, so a dreamless sleep potion won't help. He lowered his feet to the floor and let his hair hide his face, so he could pretend Ginny wasn't there, hearing and seeing all this. Maybe there's a potion that stops visions, Ron tried to suggest hopefully. There isn't, Harry's mother said, but maybe there's another way. Dumbledore suggests that you learn occlumency. What's occlumency? Harry asked. It's a magical practice that might allow you to block the visions, his mother explained. In layman's terms, you may think about it like a mind-reading blocker. It's much more complicated than that, but that's basically what it does. It's the best way to counter the visions, at least in the short term. Great, when can I start? Well, there is one small issue. The only person Dumbledore knows that's proficient in occlumency is Severus. And there's no way we're going to let him probe around in your head, James said, before Harry could voice his resistance. Can't Dumbledore teach him? Ginny interjected. He must know it, doesn't he? For some reason, Harry's mother looked a little troubled by that suggestion. Harry himself was not sure he could even stomach the possibility of having private lessons with Dumbledore. The mare, though, made rage surge through his veins. Let's just say I can write a book with the amount of excuses we got when we asked him about it, Harry's father said bitterly. One would think he could take time out of his busy schedule for something like this. Lily shook her head, as if to clear her doubts. I'll do it, she said to Harry. I don't know occlumency, but we can learn together. I'll get all of the books I can from the restricted section in Hogwarts, and we'll start tomorrow. Harry nodded, feeling drained and hopeless. Try to rest, his mother said, touching his shoulder. This time he didn't push her away. Thanks, he said emptily. Harry's parents left, leaving Ron and Ginny behind. I need to talk to Harry, Ginny said to her brother. Alone. Why? Ron asked suspiciously. Go get a glass of water, Ginny said in a serious voice, and for some reason Ron listened to her and left. Does that only work on him, or can you teach me to do that to anybody? Harry said, in a desperate attempt to make the atmosphere less heavy, while Ginny sat on the bed next to him. He didn't want to have this conversation. I would teach you, but you're not scary enough, Ginny replied, pushing him playfully and closing the distance between them. I just wanted to tell you that I'm here for you if you want to talk or anything. I know what it feels like when a nasty dark wizard is messing with your mind. At least he spared you the memories of the things you did when he was controlling you, Harry said with increasing bitterness. And he never made you kill anyone. Ginny took his hand. It's not your fault. Voldemort is killing those people, not you. That's the thing, Harry said painfully, ready to tell Ginny the truth. During the vision, I'm not standing on the side and watching Voldemort do these things. I am Voldemort. I feel the magic of the killing curse when I cast it. The light in the room was dim, but he was sure Ginny paled a little. Don't be an idiot, she said finally. You're not Voldemort, no matter what visions he makes you see. He's trying to torment you. He's doing a good job at it. Ginny said nothing, just held his hand in silence. To his relief, Ron's footsteps were heard outside the door after a short moment, and Ginny returned to her room. The next morning, right after breakfast, Harry began learning occlumency with his mother. They settled in the dining room on the first floor, which was isolated and spacious enough. Lily had already visited the library at Hogwarts and had somehow managed to skim most of the books she got by the time Harry joined her. To understand occlumency, one also needs to understand legilimency. They are two opposite sides of the same magical practice, she explained to Harry as they sat at the large table, which was covered by open spell books. One allows the practitioner to penetrate his opponent's mind, while the other protects the mind from such intrusions. A skilled legilimens may use their skill to find out if a person is lying, to inspect their memories, and even implant their own memories and ideas in the other's mind. The last sentence came with a hint of unease. You think that's what Voldemort's doing to me? Harry asked outright. I don't know, Lily replied uncertainly. But however he does it, being able to seal off your mind will surely help you resist him. She looked over one of the books and went on, to control occlumency, one requires much more than expertise in magic. It says here that the incantation and the wand work only serve to enhance and channel the force of the mind. It requires a strong will. Much like curses, such as the Imperious Curse, your willpower must be at least as strong as your opponent's if you hope to resist him. So what's the first step? Harry asked, impatient to get started. There seem to be several disciplines to master occlumency, Lily said, pulling over a different book. I didn't have time to go over all of them, so we'll start by trying the most popular one. It involves gaining control of the mind by clearing it of thoughts and worries. Clearing it, so what I somehow need to not think about anything? Harry asked in despair. Of course not, that's impossible. You can't not think, but you can manage your thoughts. It's like meditation. Each time a thought passes through your head, don't latch on to it. Just let it pass by. Does that make sense? Harry shook his head heavily. Don't be sorry. It's going to take practice. We'll do it together. They spent the whole morning practicing how to clear their mind. His mother suggested starting with breathing exercises that were supposed to help him calm down. That in itself was close to impossible. After almost an hour of that, they began to practice letting go of their thoughts. The whole experience was very frustrating for Harry. Thoughts buzzed in his head like bees, and it was especially difficult to stay alert when he had barely slept at night. Every few minutes, his mother spoke softly to remind him to let go of any thoughts that were occupying him. But the moment he did that, another thought came around. He didn't understand how all this would help him stop his visions. Thus began one of the most difficult weeks of Harry's life. The visions continued, night after night, until he almost began to get used to them and stopped waking up screaming. Instead, he would lie in his bed and stare at the dark ceiling, a lump of ice in his chest, as he pondered his last victim. Any time he wasn't in an occlumency lesson with his mum, he was too tired and wound up to do anything else but contemplate Voldemort's next step in dread. He tried not to sleep, but at some point his body would give in and take him back to Voldemort's embrace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Voldemort's pale hands or his Muggle victims, who became more numerous every night. Even when he managed to avoid these thoughts, his mind immediately took him to the cemetery and to Cedric's dead eyes. These memories, which hadn't plagued him so severely since the summer, seemed to be intensified by the occlumency lessons. As hard as he tried avoiding thinking about the visions, his mind focused more and more on the graveyard, as if his body wouldn't let him escape the horror. Every morning his father would ask him if he saw something in his vision that could give away the location of the crime, so they could try to stop Voldemort from killing again, but he never managed to do that. There was never any indication that could reveal Voldemort's location. All he could ever see was only the stone floor, dark columns, and the victim. Ginny made a heartwarming attempt to try to help him practice his occlumency. She managed to convince Emily, Ron, and the twins to have joint mind-clearing sessions, where they all sat together on the rug in the damp greenhouse and attempted to clear their minds for 1 hour each day. After the first session, Fred and George gave up on the endeavor apologetically, and Harry didn't hold it against them. Ron and Emily braved all the sessions, but Ron would consistently fall asleep with his head resting on the sofa, and Emily would get bored and start fiddling with the threads in the rug. Only Ginny sat with Harry loyally throughout all of the sessions. Her presence didn't necessarily help him clear his mind, but the feeling he wasn't alone eased his torment. Sometimes he would find himself staring at her absent-mindedly while she sat with her eyes closed. It would be a few moments before he would realize that, while he was admiring the way the winter sun illuminated her concentrated face, his mind had been blissfully empty. But once the fragile concentration was broken, he would be flooded with frustration and self-hate. If Ginny had stayed with Michael, or at least hadn't started dating him instead, she wouldn't have to spend her holiday holding his hand throughout his occlumency training. On the third day of trying to clear his mind of thoughts, he started losing his patience with his mother. He couldn't afford spending his days meditating. He had to learn how to seal off his mind, and fast. "What's the next step?" he asked her, as he tried desperately to decipher a page from one of the books. "It's a big leap. I'm not sure it's right to try it yet. You need more practice," his mother said uneasily. "What is it?" Harry insisted. His mother hesitated. Seeing his pleading and exhausted face, she said at last, "Well, the only way to measure your ability to use occlumency is to cast legilimency on you and see if you are able to counter it." "All right, let's do that." "It's not so simple," his mother stressed. "Harry, do you understand that it means that I would have to perform legilimency on you? And if you fail to counter, which is very likely, I'm going to see everything you're thinking about." That gave Harry a pause. He felt very uncomfortable having his mind exposed to someone, least of all his mother. He didn't want her to get upset by what she would see there. "It might not work at all," his mother said. "I've only been practicing the spell for 3 days, but if it will—" "I want to do it," Harry said decisively, getting to his feet. "I want the visions to stop." His mother gave him a look of deep empathy. She got up as well, and they stood in front of the fireplace. "I'm going to cast the spell now," Lily said tensely. "Try to block it by using a shield spell." The first try, Harry countered the spell with ease, but before he could rejoice, his mother informed him she had failed to cast it correctly. She tried again a few more times. Harry noticed she was on edge and realized how hard it must have been for her to cast a spell like that on him. Finally, after taking a few calming breaths, like they had been practicing in those last few days, she succeeded, and Harry failed miserably. He felt his eyes rolling back. At once, he was reliving the murder of the victim from the night before, an elderly man. He cried and begged as Voldemort told him how he was going to kill him, but that it wouldn't hurt at all. Voldemort laughed, and Harry felt the rasp in his throat, as if he was the one laughing. He cast the killing curse, and Harry felt the cold electricity running through his veins. When it was over, he was laying on the floor, his scar burning. His mother was sitting beside him on the floor, tears running down her face. He sat up and pushed the hair out of his face. His skin was cold and covered in sweat. "Again," he said, not without a pang of guilt in the face of his mother's tears. She wiped her tears and nodded. They practiced every day from morning to evening, and he failed consistently, time after time, day after day. They started every morning with an hour of breathing exercises and meditation. But when the time came to block the spell, all of his fears and doubts came rushing back at him. It started with the visions, then the graveyard, then he was pulled back to the Chamber of Secrets, and his encounter with Quirrell in his first year, reduced back to a small and terrified boy who just wanted to get away from a home where he wasn't wanted, and found himself being haunted by a terrifying Dark Lord. On the 8th day of the lessons, he came around on the floor, and his mother looked especially worried. She wiped his face with a handkerchief, and he realized his nose was bleeding. "That's enough for today," she said decisively. "I want to continue," Harry insisted. He had been learning occlumency for more than a week, and he hadn't made any progress. The day after tomorrow, he was supposed to go back to Hogwarts, and he knew he wouldn't be able to go back as long as the visions continued to haunt him. "No," she said. The last few days took a toll on her. She looked pale and haggard. "Your body is telling you to rest. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but until you are able to control your emotions, it will be very hard for you to master occlumency." "How am I supposed to do that when I know that Voldemort's going to kill another person tonight?" Harry replied angrily. "I don't know," his mother admitted in despair. "Go get some rest." "No." Harry shook himself out of her grasp and got to his feet, holding his wand. After nearly 2 weeks of sleep deprivation, everything seemed a bit like a dream. "We both know I can't go back to the Hogwarts dorms in this state. I need to learn occlumency today." "Harry, no." "Please," he pleaded, realizing he sounded pathetic. "I don't want to live like that anymore." His mother flinched like she had been struck. If he hadn't been so exhausted, he might have felt bad for making her feel like that. "All right," she agreed as she got to her feet and took her place, wand at hand. "But this is absolutely the last time." Harry nodded readily, holding his wand tight. He decided at that moment that clearing his head was not the way to go. He decided that instead he was going to let everything in. He thought about Voldemort rising from the cauldron in the graveyard, thought about how afraid he had been to die. He thought about all of Voldemort's victims. He thought about how terrified he was of losing his family again. He thought about Ron and Hermione going back to Hogwarts without him. He thought about Ginny sitting with her eyes closed, her face lit by the winter sun. The spell came hurling towards him. He put up the shield spell, and it shattered like glass. His eyes rolled back, and then something strange happened. He was in the graveyard, but he wasn't reliving the events. He was standing on the side, seeing himself chained to the headstone. As he watched the traumatic event unfold before him, he felt a strange sense of detachment. A door appeared out of nowhere, in the middle of the dark graveyard. It called to him. He gave one last look at his own self, chained and frightened, and opened the door. He woke up on the floor. A strange ringing sound filled his ears. "What happened?" his mother asked, looking even more worried than usual. "You looked almost peaceful." "I'm not sure," Harry said. He tried to get up, but his head was swimming. "I think I got the hang of it." "Good," Lily said, but for some reason didn't look convinced. "We'll try again tomorrow. Go rest now." She helped him get to his room. A great exhaustion weighed on him. As he lay down on the bed in his clothes, he felt his mother looking him over worriedly, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to be concerned about it. The truth was that apart from the tiredness, he felt better than he had all holiday, as if some internal barrier had been released inside him. Even his scar didn't hurt. As he was sinking into a peaceful sleep, He heard his parents talking in hushed voices outside the room, and he thought he heard his mother crying. He didn't quite understand why they were so worried, but he felt grateful that they cared about him. With this thought he let sleep, in the form of black silk sheets, wrap around him and pull him down into the darkness. On the 12th night of Christmas, he didn't kill. He woke up in the narrow bed, in the darkness. It felt natural to be there, in this body, and already he felt the magical power bubbling in the depths of his being, waiting for him to let it burst forth. He sat up and placed his feet on the cold floor. He meticulously put on the glasses. Next to them, on the nightstand, lay a wand, next to a white embroidered handkerchief. He took both objects and got out of bed. "Where are you going, boy?" a voice from the other side of the bed asked. Phineas Nigellus sat in his frame in the darkness. "None of your business," he replied calmly, and immediately left. He felt that the former headmaster's suspicion had been aroused, and that, at this very moment, he was warning Dumbledore that something was wrong. He left the room, careful not to wake the other boy, and navigated skillfully to the second floor. He had never been in this house before, yet it felt familiar enough. After all, he had visited it in his dreams many times. He stopped at a door on the second floor and opened it quietly. He entered the dark bedroom and went to the nearest bed, waking the girl sleeping in it gently. "Harry," Ginny mumbled, half asleep. "You all right?" "Yeah," he whispered, coaxing her to get out of bed. "I want to show you something." Ginny was too confused to resist. He led her down a few doors to the library. Holding her hand in one hand and his wand in the other, he effortlessly lifted the complex locking charm on the door. This time, he was careful to also avoid the hidden protective charms that had previously alerted the Potters to his actions. "Harry, what are you doing?" He ignored the girl, who was beginning to wake up enough to understand what was happening, and led her to the center of the library. The mirror was still there, covered with a white sheet. He pulled the sheet down, revealing their reflections in the winter moonlight. Ginny screamed. He didn't know that in the enchanted mirror his true identity would be revealed. A pale, snake-like face and blood-red eyes stared back at him with rage. She tried to escape. He summoned ropes from the end of his wand, quick as snakes, that bound her hands. He pulled her towards him angrily. She was completely terrified, unable to even scream any more once she understood who he really was. Beneath the familiar face, he was not Harry Potter, but Lord Voldemort. "You're lucky you're more valuable alive than dead," he hissed at her, and hurried to cast the charm that would open an enchanted passage that would lead them through the mirror to his own home. He had barely finished casting the complex incantation when the Potters and several other Order members burst in. Dumbledore had managed to warn them. "Ginny!" a woman shrieked somewhere within the group. The girl tried to use the opportunity to escape, but in the boy's body, the Dark Lord was much stronger than her. He grabbed her arm with force and cursed the Order members, who predictably hesitated for fear of harming the boy. It was a simple stasis charm he had invented himself, inspired by the common stunning charm, but even he himself hadn't imagined how strong its effect would be with to use of his new-found power. Everyone froze completely in their places, the words of defensive spells frozen on their lips, and even their eyes froze in their sockets. He smiled with satisfaction. He had forgotten what it felt like to be this powerful. "You were excellent pawns, and for that I thank you," he said to the Order members condescendingly, and finished the last stage of casting the incantation on the mirror. "Your hiding place will be to the liking of many of my followers. I'm sure they will be pleased to know exactly where it is." With these ominous words, he stunned the girl to make her stop writhing, pulled her close to him, and walked through the mirror as if it were nothing more than water. The moment they crossed to the other side, the charm on the Order members broke. James Potter ran to the mirror, hitting it with his fist in a desperate attempt to break it, to no avail. The Dark Lord crossed the library in the reflection to the door. He gave the Potters one last triumphant smile before he and Ginny passed through the door and disappeared from the reflection without a trace. Chapter 36, Ruins. They burned Grimmauld Place to the ground that night. The children were woken abruptly, packed only the essentials, and apparated with Marley and Arthur and Tonks to the burrow, confused and half asleep. Lily reluctantly sent Emily to the burrow, not answering when her daughter asked her again and again where Harry was, and went to help the others gather everything they could from the library. They took with them all the material they had collected on the Horcruxes and famous relics of the Hogwarts founders and fled, knowing that the Death Eaters could arrive at any moment. "What are you doing?" Remus shouted to Sirius as he pushed the parchment scrolls and books he had collected into his friend's arms and took out his wand. "I won't let the Death Eaters have this house," he replied passionately. "There won't be anything left here by the time they arrive." "What are you going to do?" "Fiendfire, nothing will survive that." Any other time Lily would have told him that it was madness to cast such a dangerous curse, but at that moment she could think of nothing but what had happened. She, James, and Remus ran outside, and up the stairs they heard a roar of flames, an explosion, and shattering glass. They barely managed to get out into the street when huge flames burst from the house windows, and Sirius ran out, dragging a wailing creature by his loincloth. "Mistress, mistress." "There's no more mistress," Sirius snapped at him. He pulled off his slipper and pushed it into the devastated house elf's hands. "That's it, you're a free elf. You can run back into the flames or come with us, your choice." Creature collapsed on the pavement, sobbing bitterly. "We can't wait any longer," James said with determination as the fiendfire consumed 12 Grimmauld Place. "At this rate, the Muggles and the Ministry will get here before the Death Eaters." "We can't let the Ministry find him. He knows too much," Remus said, pointing at Creature. Sirius groaned in frustration and grabbed the house, elf again, before the four of them apparated to the burrow. They appeared outside the Weasley house in complete darkness. Creature was still crying loudly and threatening to reveal their location, so Sirius cast a silencing charm on him. They made their way to the back door, their bare feet freezing in the snow. The house was completely dark and quiet. James knocked on the door. "Who's there?" Tonks's voice came from inside. "Open up, it's just us," James replied impatiently. "That's what a Death Eater would say," Tonks said, sounding a bit like Mad-Eye. "All right, ask us something only we would know." Tonks thought for a moment and finally asked, "What did I bake for you for Christmas?" "Gingerbread cookies, but you accidentally used salt instead of sugar," Remus replied. The lock rattled, and the door opened into the dark kitchen. They went in. "I really thought they tasted weird," Tonks said in a clear and unsuccessful attempt to break the heavy tension that hung among the Order members. Marley and Arthur sat at the table with Emily, looking grey and broken. Ron and the twins stood around them, looking angry and confused. Lily realized that Marley and Arthur had already told the children what had happened. She went straight to Emily. Her daughter almost fell into her arms, and Lily noticed that she had been crying. "What's going to happen to them?" she asked in a small voice. "To Harry and Ginny." Lily didn't know, so she continued to hug her daughter and whispered, "They'll be all right." "How in Merlin's name did this happen?" Ron demanded from his parents. "You still haven't explained how he got in and took them without anyone noticing. When I went to get Harry's things, his glasses and wand weren't there. When did you know? Who have time to take them if he kidnapped him?" "You didn't tell them," James interjected, sounding angry. "Maybe it's better not to," Remus suggested in a gentle voice. "They'll find out sooner or later," James replied. "Anyway, we can't stay here. It's not safe. My parents' old house isn't far from here. I can reactivate the defenses until Dumbledore takes care of the Fidelius charm." No one argued. They took the children and apparated a short distance to the ruined Potter house. "Go inside and tell Dumbledore we've found a safe place," James said, speaking to Lily but not looking directly at her. "I'll activate the runes. It'll take some time." Lily didn't want to leave him alone. For some reason, she got the impression that he was angry at himself, but also at her. But she couldn't let Emily continue to stand barefoot in the snow, so she took her inside with a pang in her heart, leaving James alone in the snow and darkness. In the ruined entrance hall, Sirius lit a fire in the huge fireplace, while Remus sent a Patronus in the shape of a wolf to update Dumbledore on the developments and their location. "Are you finally going to explain to us what really happened to Ginny?" Fred demanded of his parents. Marley and Arthur were speechless. Marley, barely holding back tears, looked at Lily pleadingly. But then Lily also felt her voice had been taken from her. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud. "I'll tell you what happened," Sirius spoke in a voice as hard as stone when no one else dared. "Somehow, Voldemort entered Harry's body and used it to kidnap Ginny. They escaped through a mirror we suspected was connected to the attacks at Hogwarts." "What do you mean, he entered Harry's body?" Ron asked in horror. "It means he still looks like Harry, but inside he's actually Voldemort," Sirius replied in a dark voice. "Everyone knows that's not possible," George dismissed the idea. "He must have put an imperious curse on him or something." "No," Lily found her voice. "When I looked into his eyes, it was Voldemort standing in front of me, not Harry." "Does that mean Harry is dead?" Emily asked in a cracked voice. "No," Lily replied immediately, wrapping her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Harry is alive. I know it." "It still doesn't make sense," Ron insisted, refusing to accept the situation. "Why would you know who want to be a 15-year-old boy again? And what does he want with Ginny?" At that moment, the conversation was interrupted as Dumbledore stormed in, accompanied by James, Mad-Eye Moody, Kingsley, Bill, and several other Order members. He had probably summoned for an emergency meeting in light of the situation. Lily looked at Dumbledore while Bill went to his broken parents, but he didn't meet her gaze. Lily sensed he was ashamed. They gathered in the dining room, where the outer wall had collapsed into the frozen grounds outside, while Billy took the children to the guest rooms. Lily expected them to refuse to go, to fight to stay and understand what had happened, but it seemed that the absence of Harry and Ginny had broken their spirits, and they went to the rooms in dejected silence. It was cold in the drafty dining room. James summoned coats and shoes for himself and Lily, covering his wife's shoulders without saying a word or exchanging a look. "Thank you," Lily said quietly, while everyone sat around the table in the candlelight. Like Dumbledore, James didn't look at her either. It made her feel especially lonely. "Is what they're saying true, Dumbledore?" Mad-Eye croaked, wasting no time. "Have you ever heard of a wizard who managed to do something like that, to possess another person's body?" "I have not heard of such a case before," Dumbledore said. While everyone sat around the table, he stood with his back to the frozen night. He looked older than ever, and at the same time determined, almost vengeful. "However, I have no doubt that he has indeed managed to do so." As the portrait I appointed to watch over Harry at Grimmauld Place testified, and according to everyone who was present there tonight, the boy who kidnapped Ginny and escaped through the mirror was not Harry. I believe that the special connection between Harry and Voldemort was what allowed this to happen. "So if Harry is Voldemort, does that mean Voldemort is Harry now?" Bill asked, looking pale. "I don't think that's the case, since Harry doesn't have the knowledge or the ability to do what Voldemort did. At least not yet," Dumbledore replied. "It is too early to say, but given everything I have heard, I tend to believe that Voldemort and Harry share the same body. Voldemort is certainly suppressing him with his occlumency skills. Perhaps he is holding him in some pleasant dream or memory to prevent him from fighting back." Now James spoke, his voice as cold as the snow outside. "You seem to know quite a lot about the situation, Dumbledore, considering you claim to be no less surprised than any of us." "I didn't know this was going to happen," Dumbledore replied calmly, understanding exactly what James was getting at. "You didn't know, but you suspected," James accused. "That's why you've been avoiding seeing him for months. You suspected that connection you always go on about might result in something like this. If I had known this would happen, I would have shared my concerns with you, Dumbledore continued, this time in a firmer voice. Despite what you want to think, James, I always think only of Harry's best interests. You are no less to blame. Marley suddenly burst out at James, broken and angry. You decided to bring that mirror to headquarters. Why couldn't you just leave it at Hogwarts, like everyone told you to? It was clear it was tainted with dark magic. Do you really think he couldn't have just walked through the front door? James retorted sarcastically. You saw what he did to all of us with a single curse, without even trying. Besides, if I had known that people could walk through mirrors, I wouldn't have put it in the house where my children sleep. At that moment, Severus entered, interrupting the argument. He was pale as a sheet, and despite the intense cold, sweat was beading on his white forehead. You saw him, Lily demanded, immediately understanding the reason for Severus's shaken appearance. Voldemort had summoned him. Is he all right? He is unharmed, physically at least, Severus replied in a hoarse voice. The Dark Lord is very pleased that his secret plan has succeeded. Lily sank into her seat. That was not exactly the answer she wanted to hear. On the other hand, she didn't know what she had expected to hear. The person Severus had met tonight wasn't Harry. The good news, if there is any, is that he doesn't seem to have the boy's actual thoughts and memories. That means he doesn't know the identity of the members of the Order who weren't at headquarters tonight, including myself. What a joy, Sirius hissed sourly. What about Ginny? Did you see her? Arthur asked in a desperate voice. Only a glimpse, but she didn't seem to be hurt, Severus said. The Dark L. He cleared his throat, unable to call the one who looked like Harry the Dark Lord. He claims he has no intention of harming her. What does he want in exchange for her? Kingsley asked directly. Nothing, Severus replied, slumping into a nearby chair. He was not willing to share his plans for her with me, but it seems what he wants is simply her. What could he possibly want from her? Marley cried out in rage. He almost took her from us once before. We need to find out why he took her, Elphia's Doge said passionately. She must be connected to his plan somehow. What other reason would he have to take her? A hesitant voice came from the far end of the table. I think I might know why. Speak, Tonks. Don't keep information to yourself, Mad-Eye growled, his magical eye rolling to look at her. Well, I wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but I guess it doesn't matter now, Tonks said hesitantly. When they got back from Hogwarts, Ginny told me that she and Harry started going out. You know, that they were together, she added for the benefit of the older Order members. This information didn't surprise Lily. She had already suspected during the summer that Harry had feelings for Ginny. Like James when they were young, he was very transparent in that sense. During the second half of term, Lily had noticed that her son was acting dreamy and almost cheerful, clear signs of a boy in love. And during the holiday, the hints couldn't have been more obvious, as Harry and Ginny would both mysteriously disappear at the same time. And you didn't think that was information you should share with the Order, Elphias chastised Tonks. Leave her alone, Elphias. As expected, Remus came to the younger Order members' defense. How could something like that even be significant? Voldemort knows that the power of love is one of the strongest forces in the world, Dumbledore explained, but he is unable to understand it. It is possible that he thinks that Harry's love for Ginny or her love for him will strengthen him somehow, or that he will be able to harness its power. We must find a way to get Ginny back before he understands that her presence will not benefit him and may even harm him. I still don't understand why he did this, Sirius said angrily. How will it benefit him to be a 15-year-old boy again? First and foremost, from my acquaintance with Voldemort, it's possible he did it simply because he is capable, Dumbledore replied gloomily. But if I had to give an explanation for his decision, I would say that he plans to harness Harry's power for his own benefit. With his knowledge and Harry's magical potential, he will be stronger than ever. The Order meeting continued until dawn. During it, the Order members tried to come up with ideas on how to rescue Ginny from the place where Severus had reported Voldemort was holding her, an abandoned castle on the southern coast of Britain, filled with unthinkable defenses and curses enhanced by dark magic. No one spoke about how they would get Harry back, but judging by the way James was silent throughout the meeting, Lily imagined that he was already concocting plans of his own on how to do so. At the end of the meeting, Dumbledore asked to speak with her and James alone. The Order members left the ruined dining room, and the three of them were left to sit alone around the table. "So what now, Dumbledore?" James said after everyone had left, still angry with the headmaster. "Now, more than ever, we must focus on destroying the Horcruxes," Dumbledore replied severely. "What exactly do you think we've been doing so far?" James retorted. "How do we get Harry back?" Lily demanded of Dumbledore. "Please tell me you have a plan." "To my great regret, I do not have a plan yet," Dumbledore replied heavily. "For now, we can only hope that Harry will be strong enough to free himself from Voldemort's grasp." James suddenly got up and left the room through the hole in the wall into the grey dawn outside. Lily didn't call out for him to wait. "I understand that this situation is very difficult for you," Dumbledore said to Lily softly, his bright eyes sad. "I hope you at least believe me that if I had known something like this would happen, I would have done everything in my power to stop it." "I know," Lily said. She lowered her gaze to her hands, which were pale from the cold. "I wish there was something I could do to help Harry." "We will find a way, Lily. I promise," Dumbledore said. Lily believed him. Afterwards, the headmaster left, asking Lily to thank James for allowing the Order to use his parents' old house. And then he hugged Lily, something he had only done once before, after he first told them about the prophecy, and left. Lily stayed in the dining room for a bit, until the loneliness became unbearable. She very much wanted to be comforted in James's arms, but she was afraid of what he would say to her, and the things he would blame her for when they were alone. Instead, she went to look for Emily in the guest rooms. She found her daughter sleeping, her face swollen from tears. She lay down next to her in the narrow bed, while the freezing dawn crept through the narrow windows, and for the first time allowed herself to grieve for her son.